Chapter 337. Along the way, Li Guanwen appeared to be looking straight ahead, but in reality, he was secretly sizing up the woman beside him. He had some thoughts in his mind. It was no wonder that when the Empress heard the news of the Qin clan's complaint, she didn't care about the anxiety of her father being imprisoned, and even sent her most capable servant to investigate. If this girl entered the palace, her appearance alone would be top-notch among the noble masters. If she was a bit shrewd, then her future would be limitless. Li Guanwen's attitude towards Qin Yining became more and more cautious. As a small eunuch who had been bullied in his early years, Li Guanwen deeply understood the principle of don't bully a poor youth. When he was going up the stairs, he didn't forget to remind Qin Yining, "Miss Qin, please wait outside the hall for a moment. Allow me to report to your majesty." "Yes, thank you for your trouble." Qin Yining returned a polite smile. Li Guanwen saw that her attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. She was polite and didn't lose her composure. Thinking that she came here to complain to the emperor and to complain to the fierce Prince Zhongshan, how could this kind of woman be an ordinary person? In his heart, he regarded her even more highly. Li Guanwen went in to reply, and then came out to invite Qin Yining in after a while. Qin Yining looked calm on the surface, but she was extremely nervous on the inside. Li Qiqian was different from the two emperors of Great Yan. He was a shrewd man, and a man who was able to force Pang Xiao, an extremely intelligent man, to not act rashly. So, how could he be someone easy to deal with? To tell the truth, she was very nervous. But since she had already chosen this method, she couldn't turn back. The imperial study was very spacious. The floor was covered with shiny black marble tiles. There were no treasures on the treasure pavilion, only books. In the bookcase behind the black lacquered bookcase, there were collections of classics and history arranged in different categories. Li Qiqian, wearing a new bright yellow uniform, was sitting behind the desk. His index finger, which wore a jade ring, was tapping on the table. The sound was extremely crisp in the empty room. "Greetings to your majesty. Long live your majesty. You may rise." Li Qiqian's voice was particularly amiable. "Thank you, your majesty." Qin Yining bowed again, then stood up and lowered his head. She had specially learned the rules of interest from Mammy Zhan. Her bearing and demeanor were elegant, even more pleasing to the eye than the real princess of Li Helan. Li Qiqian sat upright in his original position, sizing her up without leaving a trace. He thought to himself, in the end, even a hero has a weakness for the charms of a beautiful woman. No wonder Dao Niuji she couldn't help but love and hate this woman and couldn't forget her. Li Qiqian's voice became even more amiable. "This is the first time someone has sounded the drum of hearing since I stepped on the throne. What surprised me even more was that the person who had the courage to sound the drum of hearing to complain was actually a little girl like you. Qin clan, what great injustice have you suffered? If it's not a small matter, I will punish you for making a fuss over nothing and making fun of me." Although Li Qiqian's attitude was gentle, the meaning behind his words was not. In addition, Qin Yining had some understanding of Li Qiqian's methods. When faced with such a shrewd emperor, the pressure she felt was so strong that it was as if it could turn into a vine and wrap around her body. Qin Yining took a deep breath and calmly said, "Replying to your majesty, this subject's daughter does not dare to act rashly. This subject's daughter truly has suffered a great injustice. This subject's daughter accompanied my father and traveled thousands of miles to seek refuge with your majesty. Because your majesty is a sage emperor, and because the imperial court of Dezhou accepts people from all walks of life, my father finally has a place to use his talents." Everyone in the family was very happy. "We only thought that once we came to Dezhou, my father would have a wise emperor to pledge his loyalty to, and this subject's daughter would also be able to live a stable and prosperous life in the capital. Who would have thought that not only would we be robbed by bandits on the road and lose our parents, but this subject's daughter would also be kidnapped by evil people as soon as she entered the city." At this point, Qin Yining's beautiful eyes were already filled with tears. However, she stubbornly refused to let her tears fall. She angrily and humiliatingly said, Prince Zhongshan disregarded this subject's daughter's wishes and forcibly took this subject's daughter into his mansion. His intentions were evil. This subject's daughter was alone and had no other choice. Yesterday, Prince Zhongshan said that he was tired of this subject's daughter and drove this subject's daughter out of his mansion at night. Qin Yining's tears finally fell. She knelt down and kowtowed as she said, "In the presence of your majesty, Prince Zhongshan actually did such a lawless thing. I beg your majesty to uphold justice for this subject's daughter and severely punish this evil person." Listening to her tearful complaints, Li Qiqian raised his eyebrows in surprise. Everyone in the city knew that she had been forcibly taken back by Pang Xiao, and he knew more than ordinary people. He had also suspected the relationship between Pang Xiao and Qin Yining. However, based on the spies' reports, it seemed that Pang Xiao loved and hated her at the same time. He didn't expect that a person with self-control like Pang Xiao would be able to drive people out of his mansion in a fit of anger. Li Qiqian was amused by this lively show and felt extremely relaxed. However, he still had a dignified expression on his face. Something like this actually happened. He stood up in surprise and paced back and forth with his hands behind his back as he said, "This emperor didn't know this would happen. This subject's daughter was locked up in the mansion and suffered a lot. If it wasn't for the fact that this subject's daughter wanted your majesty to uphold justice for this subject's daughter would have died a long time ago. Today, this subject's daughter finally escaped from the tiger's den. This subject's daughter earnestly asks your majesty to uphold justice for this subject's daughter." Qin Yining repeatedly cowed out. Li Qiqian was happy in his heart, but he said with a serious expression, "Your one-sided story isn't enough to win my trust. How about this? This emperor summons Prince Zhongshan into the palace. You can confront him face to face. If this matter is confirmed, this emperor will punish him for you. How about it?" Qin Yining instantly understood. Li Qiqian wanted to see Pang Xiao make a fool of himself. Such a vile person. Really, Qin Yining was angry in her heart, but she had to admit that this was the effect she wanted. This subject's daughter is speaking the truth. I'm not afraid of confrontation. This subject's daughter is willing to confront evil people, Qin Yining said in an excited voice. Li Qiqian nodded and smiled as he ordered Li Guanwen to summon Pang Xiao into the palace. He also ordered a small eunuch to bring Qin Yining a chair and serve her tea and snacks. Qin Yining cautiously sat sideways on the chair and waited anxiously with her head lowered. Not long after, Pang Xiao rushed over and was led into the imperial study by Li Guanwen. When Qin Yining heard the footsteps, she suddenly raised her head and met Pang Xiao's eyes. A trace of astonishment flashed across Pang Xiao's face, but it was quickly followed by anger and embarrassment. Qin Yining's eyes were red with hatred, but because the emperor was present, she could only suppress her anger. Li Qiqian observed the two of them without leaving a trace, and he was about to burst into laughter. "Younger brother, do you know why this emperor is looking for you today?" Pang Xiao bowed to Li Qiqian, then cupped his hands and said, replying to Her Majesty, "This subject doesn't know." "You don't know?" Li Qiqian smiled and said, "This emperor thought that you would naturally understand what was going on after seeing Miss Family Qin. Let this emperor ask you, did you force her into the palace to humiliate her?" Chapter 338. Qin Yining's eyes suddenly widened. He was so angry that his lips trembled and he couldn't say a word. Li Qiqian asked with interest, "Oh, you didn't take her by force?" "Indeed, I didn't," Pang Xiao said confidently. "She gave herself to me of her own accord." You. Qin Yining was so angry that he couldn't say a complete sentence. His tears fell like beads from a broken necklace. He choked with sobs like an injured little animal. "You've gone too far." Pang Xiao proudly straightened his back and only glanced at Qin Yining from the corner of his eyes. It was as if he was a lowly ant in the dust, not worthy of his attention at all. His angular and handsome face was even colder because of his disdain. The mocking curve of his lips was enough to make people fall into the abyss of eternal damnation. Qin Yining's body trembled like a leaf destroyed by a storm. He looked really pitiful. Li Qiqian coughed and glanced at Pang Xiao mockingly. Pang Xiao seemed to feel something. He turned to look at Li Qiqian. Pity and hatred flashed in his eyes before they could be cleaned up. Noticing Li Qiqian's gaze, Pang Xiao coughed awkwardly to cover up his embarrassment. Li Qiqian looked at the two of them. He was in a good mood, as if he had drunk a bowl of hot soup on a cold day. It was more interesting than watching the story of the thorn and hairpin. He could see that Pang Xiao still had a trace of pity for Qin Yining. Unfortunately, his pity couldn't overcome the hatred of his father's murder. In this way, he could use the family Qin people to check and balance the imperial court without worry. He didn't have to worry about Pang Xiao and the family Qin working together. With tears in his eyes, Qin Yining knelt down and said, I beg your majesty to uphold justice, but he dared to deny it to my face and even made false accusations. This subject's daughter did not take the initiative. Any woman would be unable to restrain their shyness when such words were spoken. Qin Yining's face was as red as the sunset. Li Qiqian, on the other hand, could not possibly punish Pang Xiao severely at this time. Now, in the cabinet, only Pang Xiao was his confidant. In the future, he would need Pang Xiao's help. Li Qiqian would not let Pang Xiao's reputation be tarnished. Although Pang Xiao's behavior of snatching people that day was well known, he was still biased at this moment. Moreover, if a man took a fancy to a girl who was the daughter of his enemy, if he didn't snatch her by force, was he supposed to go through the 3 matchmakers and 6 betrothal ceremonies? However, he couldn't say this to Qin Yining. After all, Qin Yining was Qin Huaiyuan's daughter. If he blindly favored her and neglected her, it wouldn't look good. Li Qiqian could only say, we will carefully investigate this matter. You may withdraw. Qin Yining raised her head while choking with sobs. Her beautiful eyes flashed with grief and grief. However, she also knew that in front of the emperor, she couldn't be willful. Thus, she could only bow obediently. This subject's daughter will withdraw. Li Guanwen led Qin Yining out of the imperial study. Pang Xiao couldn't help but turn around to look at her back. It wasn't until the doors of the hall were closed and the cold air outside that Pang Xiao came back to his senses. When he suddenly saw Li Qiqian's teasing smile, Pang Xiao awkwardly said, Your Majesty, what are you looking at? Younger brother, even heroes have a weakness for beauties. Only the two of them were left in the hall. When Li Qiqian spoke, his tone was much more intimate. Don't blame us for not reminding you. That little beauty is a thorny rose. You should be careful not to prick yourself. Although you like her, you can play with her as a plaything. However, don't fall too deeply in her trap. Don't forget what happened to General Yin that day. In short, what kind of woman can't we brothers want? Younger brother, you should also think about your own reputation. Don't let others have something to talk about. Li Qiqian's words seemed to have no clue, but the most obvious provocation was very clear. Pang Xiao's heart was as clear as a mirror. He nodded in agreement without batting an eyelid and said with hatred, How could this subject really do anything to her? The hatred of my father's murder is absolutely irreconcilable. When this subject cut those people into pieces, it wasn't enough to avenge my father's death. The main culprit hasn't been eliminated yet. Li Qiqian heard this and fell silent. If Pang Xiao wanted to openly fight with Qin Huaiyuan, the balance of his plan would be broken. This was the situation that Li Qiqian didn't want to see the most. Moreover, Qin Huaiyuan was a truly talented person. Li Qiqian also had some affection for him. It seemed that his provocation just now had gone too far. When Pang Xiao saw Li Qiqian's expression, other than understanding, there wasn't any other fluctuation in his heart. He had already seen through this brother, Li Qiqian. However, on the surface, Pang Xiao still acted as if he was conflicted and helpless. In the end, he said considerately, This subject knows that your majesty loves talented people. That Qin Ming really does have some ability. This subject is willing to consider your majesty's thoughts. This subject will definitely not have any discord with Qin Ming. Of course, this is on the premise that they don't take the initiative to provoke this subject. Li Qiqian received Pang Xiao's promise and nodded with great satisfaction. Now that you have a reputation, How would they dare to act rashly in front of you? However, the Qin family has already arrived in the capital, but Qin Ming still hasn't been found. The people we sent to search for him also returned with no news of Qin Ming's whereabouts. This is truly a headache. Could it be that Qin Ming met with some accident? It was another test. Pang Xiao said, perhaps he got separated and lost his way. Or perhaps the heavens knew that he had sinned deeply and punished him on behalf of this subject. Although Pang Xiao's words made Li Qitian unhappy, in the end, it allowed him to confirm that the Qin family and the Pang family were not on good terms. Li Qitian didn't want to dwell on this matter anymore. Therefore, he and Pang Xiao began to discuss the affairs of the imperial court after entering the pavilion. At this time, Qin Yining was led by Li Guanwen to the side hall. She washed her face, applied some lotion, and rearranged her hair. Qin Yining secretly thought that the people in the palace were really attentive. To be able to receive the care of the head eunuch Li Guanwen, her attitude was extremely cautious. Li Guanwen intended to be kind to her. Therefore, the two of them were very polite and didn't have any ill feelings toward each other. Qin Yining finished tidying up, got on the small oil cart, and left under the escort of a young eunuch. The inside of the cart was slightly cold, which was just enough for Qin Yining to calm down. Who would have thought that the slowly moving oil cart would suddenly stop? Qin Yining asked doubtfully, "What's wrong?" No one answered from outside the cart. Qin Yining's heart suddenly became alert. Just as he was about to lift the curtain to take a look, the curtain was lifted from the outside. Standing in front of the cart were two young women dressed in luxurious clothes. One of them was dignified and noble, dressed in red. She was the Anyang Grand Princess, whom Qin Yining had met once before. Standing next to her was a very beautiful young woman in the prime of her life. The young woman was of medium height and had a plump figure. She wore a cloak with a red fox fur collar and a sleeping rabbit with a ruby of the same color. Her makeup was exquisite, and her red lips were lustrous and moist. Standing next to Li Helan, even though she was a bit older, she still suppressed the Grand Princess's elegance. Among the noble women in the capital, who could stand next to the Anyang Grand Princess and walk around the palace? At this time, Li Helan smiled and said, "Miss Qin, please don't blame us. It's just that it's rare to see a woman of the same age in the palace. Sister Lu and I have nothing to do. When we heard that Miss Qin entered the palace, we especially came to see you." Chapter 339. The curiosity in the eyes of the young woman, surnamed Lu, was very straightforward. She did not hide her invasive gaze at all. The arrogant aura around her body was even stronger than that of the Grand Princess Li Helan. From her current expression, it could be seen that this woman was a proud daughter of heaven who was born with a golden spoon in her mouth. It was likely that she had never experienced any disappointment in her life. While she was thinking, Qin Yining had already gotten off the carriage and bowed to the two. As the eldest princess, Li Helan naturally received Qin Yining's bow. But the young woman did not react at all. She did not return the bow and only raised her chin, casually looking at Qin Yining. "I have long heard that the young miss of the family Qin family is very beautiful. Seeing you today, even I can't compare to you. It really is." Her red lips smacked, unable to find the right words to describe her. She did not feel embarrassed and smiled faintly. Then, as if she was doing a favor, she said, "You can call me Madame Lu." She really was a woman of high status in her maternal family. Otherwise, when a married woman was called a madam, she would have to use her husband's surname. Qin Yining lowered her eyes and said, "Madame Lu." Madame Lu seemed to be very satisfied with Qin Yining's obedience. She glanced at her simple dress again and gave a disdainful smile. "It's no wonder that the eldest princess of Anyang praised you like a fairy in front of me. She is used to exaggerating. She even praised me as a celestial being. I thought I would meet a village girl today. I never expected that there would really be someone like you in this world. Even the simple clothes and hairpin could not hide your beauty. I can see that when you were in Great Yin, when your father was in a high position, you must have been a magnificent woman. Too bad, I don't have the chance to see that face of yours." Qin Yining looked at Madame Lu in surprise. She was sure that this was the first time she had met her, But why was her words full of sarcasm? Her last sentence even implied that she was cursing the family Qin family to never be able to make a comeback. This kind of way of speaking was really unpleasant to the extreme. Perhaps Madame Lu was familiar with the eldest princess of Anyang, so she was speaking up for the eldest princess. However, this was still an important place in the palace. Qin Yining's status couldn't be compared to the two people in front of him, so he didn't dare to stay here for long. Since the conversation wasn't pleasant, Qin Yining wasn't someone who would stand there and let others bully him. Therefore, Qin Yining said goodbye politely and courteously. Li Helan smiled and said, "All right, then we can meet again next time. Thank you very much, Princess Royal." Qin Yining bowed and then got back into the oil wall carriage. Li Helan and Mrs. Lu dodged to the side. It wasn't until the carriage was far away that Madame Lu said, "The eldest princess also has times when she makes mistakes. From what I can see, this family Qin girl is an extremely well-behaved girl. She's so soft that it's hard to even pinch her." Li Helan raised her eyebrows and smiled warmly. "Perhaps I really misjudged you. However, Ben Gong is thinking that to be able to make such a heroic man like Brother Xiao fall head over heels for her, she naturally has some outstanding aspects." "Oh." Madame Lu seemed to be interested, and her eyes flashed with interest. "I've heard rumors that Prince Zhongshuan forcefully took the family Qin girl into the palace. It seems like there really is such a thing?" "Yes, there's such a thing. I went to the palace a few days ago and even saw her." "Then what is Wang Ye's attitude towards her?" Madame Lu's tone was a bit anxious. Li Helan smiled and said, "It's not like you don't know Brother Zhao's personality. However, I can see that Brother Xiao is special to her. Presumably, Prince Zhongshuan is a man who clearly distinguishes between love and hate. He must be thinking of a way to avenge his father's death." Madame Lu's cheeks flushed red and her red lips opened slightly. "To tell you the truth, my late husband and Prince Zhongshuan can be considered old friends. I have also met him a few times. He is a truly unyielding hero and would not necessarily be infatuated with a little girl." Li Helan smiled and said, "If Madame says so, then so be it. However, Ben Gong and Brother Xiao can be considered to have grown up together and are most familiar with each other. Since we were young, Ben Gong has never seen Brother Xiao so attentive to any girl." Madame Lu was displeased by the intimate way Li Helan addressed Pang Xiao and lost her patience. "In any case, the eldest princess has already been betrothed to someone else. In any case, the eldest princess has called me Jiejie for so long, so I will just say a few words. You're already engaged to Marquis Dingbei and will be the Ji family's wife in the future. However, when you mention Prince Zhongshuan, you keep saying Brother Xiao this and Brother Xiao that. What do you think Marquis Dingbei will think? Or could it be that the eldest princess is actually unwilling to give up on Prince Zhongshuan?" The last sentence was frivolous, and Madame Lu even used her bright red nail to lightly tap Li Helan's bright red cheeks. Li Helan thought of this marriage that she was dissatisfied with and thought of the person she was longing for. Her mood became even more unhappy, and she couldn't help but retort sarcastically, "There is no need to trouble Jiejie Lu to worry about Ben Gong's matters. I heard that there are 2 new male companions in the Fu, and they are twins. Although their appearances are equally handsome, their tempers are not good, and they are unwilling to properly serve Jiejie Lu. Jiejie Lu should be more concerned about the matters in your own room." When the matter of privately raising male companions was mentioned, Madame Lu did not feel the slightest bit ashamed. Instead, she nodded and said, "This man, no matter what he looks like, isn't it all the same when he enters the room? It only depends on whether his body is strong or not. The new twin brothers are young and too inexperienced. They are too embarrassed to serve others, so it is very boring. They need to be trained before they can be used." No matter how bold and unrestrained Li Helan was, she was still an unmarried girl. Hearing Madame Lu's words, she couldn't help blushing. Her heart was both shy and complicated. However, Li Helan never forgot her goal. Hearing Jiejie Lu say it like this, it is also the case. How many people in this world can be as heroic and strong as Xiao Gij? Such a well-rounded person. If he were to marry in the future, I really don't know what kind of woman he would be matched with. Li Helan's words were filled with yearning. Madame Lu thought of Pang Zhao's appearance and felt her heart itch for a moment. It was a pity that she had once invited Pang Zhao to have sex with her, but that person was dismissive of her and made her lose face. From then on, she no longer wanted to find Pang Zhao. She thought about how Pang Zhao had forcefully taken the girl from the Qin clan back to the residence. Even if Pang Zhao had humiliated her for the sake of revenge, the rice must have been cooked long ago. Such a good thing had actually happened to Qin Wanru. She had sincerely invited him, but he had rejected her. Madame Lu snorted and left unhappily without even saying goodbye to Li Helan. Li Helan looked at Madame Lu's back and sneered. She secretly cursed her for being a slut before turning back to the palace of peace and tranquility. On the other hand, Qin Yining left the palace in a carriage and did not immediately return to the guest house. Instead, he sat in the carriage with Bing Tang and waited in a quiet alley not far from the palace. Jian was sent to see if Pang Zhao had come out. After waiting for a full 2 hours, Pang Zhao finally left the palace and was led to the carriage by Ji Yun. Chapter 340. When he came in, there was a gust of cold air. Qin Yining was caught off guard and took a deep breath. Her throat felt itchy, and she couldn't help but cough twice. Pang Zhao quickly put down the curtain and said nervously, "Did you catch a cold yesterday?" His large hand touched Qin Yining's forehead. Seeing that she didn't have a fever, he let out a sigh of relief. The weather in the capital is cold. How can you adapt when you just arrived? In the winter in the north, a drop of water will turn into ice. It's more convenient for you to stay in the Wang Fu instead of staying in the guest house. Pang Zhao shook his head and looked annoyed. If I knew it would be like this, I wouldn't have cooperated with you to act. So what if I keep you in the Fu? When Pang Zhao was speaking, Bing Tang had already gotten off the carriage and walked away with Ji Yun and the driver. At this time, Pang Zhao dared to take Qin Yining into his arms without any scruples. He opened his cloak and wrapped it around her, like a big kangaroo wrapped around a small kangaroo. How about you come back with me, okay? Qin Yining snuggled into his arms and said angrily, "You're talking nonsense again. How can I go back with you now? The people outside already know that I'm going to participate in the election. I believe that this news will soon reach your Majesty's ears. If he knows that you know I'm going to participate in the election and still forcefully hold on to me, what will he think of you?" Pang Zhao chuckled and said indifferently, "If I don't hold on to you, will he easily let me go and not be afraid of me anymore? At least he won't be able to find anything that can be used against you." Qin Yining said seriously, "I don't want to be used against you." In the dimly lit carriage, her black gem-like eyes were dazzling and deep enough to make people sink into them. Pang Zhao couldn't help but lean forward and gently kiss her eyes. When she suddenly closed her eyes, her long eyelashes brushed against his lips and tickled his heart unbearably. The light kisses fell bit by bit and finally moved her lips. Pang Zhao delicately used the tip of his tongue to trace the shape of her lips and gently kissed her. His deep voice became a bit hoarse. "How are you my weakness? You're my motivation." It was because of her that he had the determination to persevere, and it was because of her that he had the courage to fight against fate. Otherwise, when he felt tired in the situation, Pang Zhao really didn't know why he was persevering and didn't know how much longer he could persevere. His ants of his scalps is his ants. It wasn't until Qin Yining was out of breath and pounded his shoulder with her soft fist that Pang Zhao let go of her hand reluctantly. He licked her bright red lips again and said, "Sister E, when the situation stabilizes, I will go to your house to propose marriage." Of course, Qin Yining knew that this man was agitated because of love. That was why he said those words without thinking. She did not doubt Pang Zhao's sincerity towards her. However, she also understood the situation in the court. They were not allowed to freely decide their own future. Right now, they could only take one step at a time. It's still too early to talk about marriage. Even if you want to propose marriage, my father must come back safely. Qin Yining looked worried. He lowered his eyes and said, I don't know if the kidnappers will harm my parents after I caused such a big commotion and refused to enter the palace. If she made a wrong judgment this time, wouldn't her parents be harmed? She did not want her family to be in a dilemma because of the struggle. However, she was even more unwilling to put her parents in danger. Pang Xiao held Qin Yining in his arms and comforted her. Since they met, she had never had a peaceful day. When Pang Xiao was young, he had been living alone in the mountains. When he returned home, he had been scheming and scheming for the sake of his life. As a result, Pang Xiao thought about it carefully and realized that his beloved Xiang, he had to work 10 times harder than others to get what she wanted. However, she had never given up fighting or blamed others. He really cherished her to the bone because she was so sensible and tenacious. Don't worry, I have already sent people to investigate what happened that day. They will definitely find the whereabouts of father-in-law and mother-in-law as soon as possible. Don't worry too much. After all, your body is damaged. You have to recuperate well. I know. With you here, I don't have to worry. Qin Yining nestled on Pang Xiao's shoulder obediently. His voice was soft and sweet. Now that we are in your territory, everything depends on you, young Master Yao. Pang Xiao couldn't help but chuckle at the last 3 words of a joke. She recalled all the things that had happened when they first met, and then looked at today. Although not much time had passed, their feelings for each other were already so deep. Just thinking about it made Pang Xiao's heart fill with sweetness. The two whispered for a while before Pang Xiao got off the carriage. He called Bing Tang over. With his back facing Qin Yining, he took out a stack of banknotes from his sleeve and gave it to her. Your miss is with the Qin family. It is inconvenient everywhere. You have to be careful. Take good care of her and help her recuperate. Bing Tang smiled and helped Qin Yining put away the family support fee. She smiled and said, Wang Yi, don't worry. If there is something we can't handle, even if Miss doesn't want to say it, this servant will definitely tell Wang Yi. When Pang Xiao saw Bing Tang being so tactful, he could not help but smile and praise her. After the two said goodbye, Qin Yining got on the carriage with Bing Tang and Ji Yun. He asked in a low voice, What did you and Wang Yi talk about just now? Bing Tang said, What else could it be? He took out the banknotes from his sleeve and shook them. He then put them back into his sleeve. Wang Yi gave me these banknotes and told me to take good care of Mrs. Body. Qin Yining was stunned. Don't I have my own banknotes? How can I use his banknotes? You shouldn't have accepted them. Bing Tang rolled her eyes at Qin Yining and said, We are already so close to Wang Yi. Could it be that Miss is still thinking about not being with Wang Yi in the future? Since we're going to be a family sooner or later, why does Miss need to be so calculative? If we're talking about calculative, how can Wang Yi repay Miss's reputation and reputation? This servant is only helping Miss to get back some interest. Moreover, once your body recovers, won't you still have to continue the Pang family's heirs in the future? No matter how you look at it, the Pang family will benefit from it. It would be a waste if we don't use this money. Qin Yining was both angry and amused by her fallacious reasoning. However, when he thought about it carefully, he didn't know how to refute it. The two of them were already so close to each other. If she couldn't marry him, Qin Yining would feel regretful and lost. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to put other men in her eyes for the rest of her life. Seeing that she was silent, Bing Tang and Ji Yun looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. The carriage quickly returned to the guest house. The master and servants returned to the side courtyard where the family Qin lived. As soon as they entered, they saw Qin Han and Qin Yu, who were waiting in the corridor. The two of them couldn't adapt to the cold in the north, so they wrapped themselves up tightly like 2 balls. Seeing that Qin Yining had returned, Qin Han was the first to smile. Fourth sister, you are back. How'd things go? Qin Yining smiled and bowed to Qin Yu and Qin Han. Things went as expected. It went very smoothly. I believe that this matter will soon be known by everyone. Your Majesty's suspicions have been dispelled, and the matter of entering the palace will probably not be mentioned again. Qin Yu and Qin Han both nodded. Qin Yu said, Fourth sister's thoughts are meticulous. You are brave and resourceful. These things won't be difficult for you. Qin Yining was embarrassed by the praise. She smiled and said, Big brother, please don't say that. You are embarrassing me. Looking in the direction of the main room, Qin Yining asked in a low voice, "Is old madam all right?" "She is all right," Qin Han said. "My father and third uncle have already analyzed the situation to old madam. Old madam can understand, but she still cried twice just now." Qin Yining thought to himself. He didn't know if old madam was crying because she couldn't enter the palace and lead the family Qin to a meteoric rise. Or was she crying because the family gave up their wealth? Or was she crying because Qin Huaiyuan was still missing? The three of them talked and entered the door one after the other. Qin Yining took off his cold outer robe outside the screen. He felt warm air wrap around his body and was about to go to the side hall. Who knew that as soon as he took a step, he would hear Han, second young mistress's voice. "Although you say that, entering the palace to serve the emperor is still a good thing. Since fourth sister can't be chosen, then the opportunity should be given to the other sisters. If this matter is made public, won't our family lose this opportunity?" Second old master and third old master coaxed old madam with great difficulty, but Han's second young mistress's words pulled old madam back from her disappointment. Old madam cried again. Qin Han, who had entered the door with Qin Yining, saw Han, second young mistress's appearance and immediately became angry. He angrily scolded, "What are you talking about? You're pregnant, so you should take care of yourself. Don't talk nonsense and pretend to know when you don't know." Han's second young mistress was scolded until her face turned red. She was too embarrassed to raise her head. Second old master saw that Qin Han was willing to give Han, second young mistress face in front of everyone and felt much better. Second old master said, "Mother, don't worry. Didn't your son tell you the reason just now? Our family has just arrived here. As long as we pass our days peacefully and slowly recuperate, we will be able to revive the family. But once we get involved in this matter, if we don't handle it well, we will be stuck between Your Majesty and Wang Yi. Our family hasn't established a firm foothold in Dezhou yet, so how can we act rashly? Mother, for the good of the family, we also know that we can think of other ways to earn money to support the family. But we can't take the initiative to get involved when we know that Your Majesty and Prince Zhongshuan have disagreements." Second old master had already talked until his mouth was dry and his tongue was dry. He had no patience. They were both D's sons, and he was also the flesh that fell from old madam's body. But with Qin Huaiyuan by her side, old madam's heart had already been biased to no end. He even thought that if Qin Huaiyuan was here, it would be much easier to persuade old madam. Thinking about the missing Qin Huaiyuan, second old master also felt heavy. He let out a long sigh. The whole room was so silent that you could hear a pin drop. The atmosphere was very heavy. Chapter 341. Eighth young lady was cheerful and honest. She had never thought about entering the palace. Instead, she felt that the palace was very scary. When she heard old madam's words, she naturally nodded in agreement. Qin Huaining, on the other hand, lowered her head and remained quiet and obedient without saying a word. She wasn't willing to let go of this opportunity, but what could she do? Your Majesty was high and mighty. Even if she wanted to do something, it was useless. Your Majesty had to choose a woman through the family's connections to participate in the selection. She couldn't bypass the family Qin and participate in the selection herself. Anyway, she was just an adopted daughter and didn't have a proper noble birth. If there was anything in the family, they had to think about Qin Yining and Qin Baoning first. It wouldn't be her turn. In just one night, the news of Qin Yining's accusation spread throughout the capital. No one knew who secretly added fuel to the fire, but the details of how Qin Yining was kidnapped and abused by Prince Zhongshuan were described vividly. It was as if they were the spirits behind the scenes to be able to see it so clearly. The message spread from 1 to 10, and from 10 to 100. Who in the upper-class circle didn't know that the family Qin's daughter was kidnapped by Prince Zhongshuan? When they thought of how Prince Zhongshuan had killed and framed Pang Zhongjing's old officials when he first entered Beiji, everyone felt deep sympathy for Miss Family Qin. However, Qin Huaiyuan had used the scheme of sowing discord to harm Pang Zhongjing. It was natural for a daughter to repay a father's death. Qin Yining's name card was naturally returned, and her participation in the election was completely over. Qin Yining took Lian Xiaozhou and her trusted maidservants with her all day long. Every day, except for going to old madam early in the morning to complete the etiquette, she spent the rest of the time doing needlework in her room. She rarely came out. When second foreign heard that Qin Yining took her maidservant to do needlework all day, she praised her several times in front of old madam. "Sister E, you're a sensible girl after all. Now that we don't have any money for ourselves, we can only stay in the guest house. Although this place takes care of our food and lodging, we're a family. What if we want to buy something? I can't ask your majesty into Zhou for money either. I see that Sister E is now working with the maidservants. Presumably, she wants to supplement the family's income." Old madam's heart ached when she heard that. Although there were many things that Qin Yining didn't do to her liking, she had to admit that she had a good view of the overall situation. Old madam then called upon the womenfolk in the family to do needlework together. Qin Huining and 8th young miss stayed by old madam's side every day. Qin Huining carefully catered to her, while 8th young miss had no one to rely on because she had lost her birth mother and mother. The two of them were extremely filial to old madam. With the rebellious and unruly Qin Yining as a comparison, in addition to the fact that old madam and Qin Huining had raised her for more than 10 years, and 8th young miss was innocent and obedient, the two of them were very liked by old madam. However, Qin Yining became the most disliked of the three granddaughters. Qin Yining didn't care about this at all. As usual, she returned to her room after saluting every day. Occasionally, one day, she would hear a little maidservant by second young Mistress Han's side and a maidservant by second foreign's side complaining. "There aren't many people left in our family. Only 4th young miss is pampered. She actually needs 5 maidservants to serve her. Qin Fu isn't as rich as before. How could she be so arrogant? Even our foreign doesn't have that many servants by her side. That's right. Our second young mistress only has me and Xiao Tao as her personal attendants." Qin Yining stopped in her tracks and held Lian Xiaozhou's hand. She turned her head to look at the 2 maidservants who had their backs facing her. She lightly laughed and said, "Escaping from disaster all the way, those who survive are all lucky. The maidservants by my side have always been very lucky. Naturally, they will all live to be 100 years old. However, good luck also has a time when it runs out. Don't get too carried away and turn good luck into bad luck." The 2 maidservants were startled and suddenly turned their heads. They saw Qin Yining wearing a light green embroidered cotton cloak and standing in the corridor with her maidservant. The gazes of several people looking at them were unfriendly. They had not forgotten how this 4th young miss used to be in charge of the inner residence. The 2 of them kept quiet out of fear and were unable to speak. Bing Tang ridiculed. "This family has already lost all their money and is now eating food from the government. They haven't touched anyone's money, yet there are still people gossiping. In the future, if they can't stay in the guest house and have to go out, they will have to rely on my master and young miss. There are still people who don't know life from death. Could it be that they won't eat when the time comes?" "Isn't that so?" Ji Yun sneered and said, "They really don't have any rules." The 2 maidservants were so scared that they didn't dare raise their heads. They stood there like quails. Qin Yining did not have any interest in reaching out to the second foreign and Han, second young mistress. She also didn't care as she left with her people. The 2 maidservants watched as Qin Yining walked away without any intention of dealing with them. Only then did they let out a long sigh of relief. After another 10 days, the Anyang eldest princess and Marquis North pacifying Ji Ziyu's wedding was approaching. The capital became lively. Pang Xiao was Ji Ziyu's sworn brother and naturally had to help out. He was so busy that he only had time to secretly watch Qin Yining a few times. After eating the laba congee, on the 10th day of the 12th lunar month, a grand wedding shook the capital. Although the family Qin stayed in the guest house, they could hear the sounds of firecrackers and the heated discussions of the people. There were also curious maidservants who secretly went to watch. When they came back, they vividly described the event. In summary, it could be summed up in one sentence. The imperial family was marrying off their daughter, and the Marquis was marrying. Outsiders could only see the grandeur of the wedding. Only the bride and groom knew their own feelings. Li Helan didn't know how many times she cried. When she saw Pang Xiao accompanying Jiziyu at the princess residence, she almost shed tears on the spot. Jiziyu was expressionless the entire time. His handsome face was like an ice sculpture. He didn't look like he was marrying, but more like he was attending a funeral. No one dared to slander Marquis North Pacifying for being dissatisfied with this marriage. They only dared to talk about Marquis North Pacifying's personality. He was too honest and too serious. On the second day of the wedding, Pang Xiao and Jiziyu had arranged to eat wine at the prince residence. Both of them drank until they were dead drunk. Jiziyu didn't even return to the prince consort's residence and directly stayed in the prince residence. When they returned home, Li Helan naturally had to be shy in front of Li Qitian and obediently thank him. Jiziyu stayed in the imperial study to talk with Li Qitian. Li Helan went to the imperial harem. The empress fell ill because of her father's death. They only met briefly before Li Helan went to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. As soon as she saw the empress dowager, Li Helan couldn't hold back her tears. The prince consort wasn't warm to me. He only dealt with me on the wedding night. Later, ordered a mama to go to the prince consort's residence to summon him. The servant said that the prince consort went to drink with his friends. With a prince consort's personality, how could he have friends? He must be unwilling to serve me. That's why he was so evasive. The more she thought about it, the more wronged Li Helan felt. She leaned on the Empress Dowager's knees and sobbed. Although she had been in love with Pang Xiao for a long time, Jiziyu was a man with military achievements. He was also handsome. He was also the man that all the women in the world flocked to. How many women could escape his occasional smile? Li Helan and Jiziyu became husband and wife. Naturally, she had many fantasies about him. However, Jiziyu was so cold to her. He didn't even kiss her in the bridal chamber. It was as if he was only doing it for the sake of Pang Xiao. Li Helan naturally couldn't say this kind of secret. However, when she thought about her marriage with Ru Yi, she felt sorry for herself. The Empress Dowager was very calm. She patted Li Helan's back to comfort her until she stopped crying. Then, she said, "Lana, don't cry. I don't think that the prince consort is that kind of person. Is there some misunderstanding? Or?" The Empress Dowager frowned. Her voice was a bit sharp. "Or is it that you still haven't given up on Pang Zhishi and he found out?" When Li Helan heard this, her heart skipped a beat. Her expression was a bit sluggish. "It shouldn't be. Have you ever gone to find Pang Zhishi again?" The Empress Dowager stared at her daughter sternly. Li Helan shook her head repeatedly. No. Pang Zhishi sent me back to the palace and handed me over to Imperial Brother. He spoke so bluntly. Why would I go find him? The Empress Dowager frowned. After thinking for a moment, she said, "How can there be an impenetrable wall in this world? Perhaps the prince consort found out. It's just that he's used to being silent. Which man in this world isn't proud? Moreover, he's such a proud son of heaven. He's your prince consort, but you've always had someone else in your heart. How do you want the prince consort to face you?" Li Helan's heart turned cold. She already understood a bit. However, how could she admit defeat on the surface? She straightened her neck and said, "I'm a princess. He has to serve me well as a princess. When I tell him to come to the princess's residence, he has to rush over from the prince consort's residence. I don't want to see him, so he has to obediently stay in the prince consort's residence. He's not allowed to take in even a bed warmer by his side. He's here to serve me. Do you want me to accommodate him?" When the Empress Dowager heard Li Helan's words, she angrily poked her forehead. The prince consort is not an ordinary man who lives off a woman. If you have such thoughts, then don't expect to be a happy husband and wife. In any case, you only want a servant to serve you, not a husband. Why are you still complaining about him? Li Helan was speechless for a moment. She knew what she wanted in her heart. She wanted Pang Zhao's love. However, now that she was married to Jiziyu, she really liked Jiziyu's handsome face. She hoped that Jiziyu would chase after her like a flock of ducks and be obedient to her. She didn't want Jiziyu to treat her so coldly. She also envied those couples who were harmonious and raised their brows. However, she was unwilling. She always thought that if she and Jiziyu didn't have a good life, would her imperial brother pity her? Would she and Pang Xiao still have hope? She knew that she wanted too much. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to get it all. However, she couldn't help but think about it. The Empress Dowager looked at Li Helan's appearance and didn't know how to teach her. She really sighed heavily. In contrast to Li Helan's confusion, Qin Yining was very happy today, because Master Zhong had finally arrived in the capital with a group of her confidants. Chapter 342. Qin Yining had experienced a lot since she came to the capital. Although no one neglected her when she was in Pang Zhao's residence, and she had Xian Yun and Lin Xiaozhou by her side, her financial lifeline was out of her control. She did not doubt Master Zhong at all. But after all, the mountain was high and the road was long, and she was powerless. Now that Master Zhong was by her side, she had the confidence to do whatever she wanted. Moreover, they had not seen each other for a long time. Now that she saw this old man who was loyal to her again, how could Qin Yining not be happy in her heart? It's a long story along the way. I'll tell you slowly in the future. Qin Yining looked at the two people behind Master Zhong and could not help but smile. Miss Jiao, Brother Liu, you're here too. Liu Jiao, and Liu Dahan were the refugees that Qin Yining took in Ninggarden. Benefactor. When Liu Dahan and Liu Jiao saw that Qin Yining remembered their names, they could not help but be excited and bowed their heads. Qin Yining hurriedly helped them up and said with a smile, "What are you doing? Get up quickly." When they were taking refuge in Ninggarden, they had suffered together. Those refugees were grateful to Qin Yining for saving their lives. Liu Dahan and Liu Jiao were more influential among them, so they had more contact with Qin Yining. Naturally, they were closer to him. Liu Jiao stood up and said with a smile, "Benefactor, Master Zhong and his family said that they want to come to you for shelter. The two of us discussed it and came together. We are not very capable, but we are definitely loyal to you. If you have any orders, just tell us. Don't stand on ceremony with us." Liu Dahan also nodded with a simple and honest smile. Qin Yining said with a smile, "That's good. I'm in need of manpower here. I can rest assured with your help. By the way, why didn't Mr. and I come with you?" When they saw that Qin Yining still remembered Scholar and I, they couldn't help but laugh. Liu Dahan said Scholar and I is getting on in years. He said that his old bones couldn't withstand the torment, so he didn't come with us to pledge his loyalty to the benefactor. Master Zhong followed the benefactor's instructions and arranged work for all of us in Ninggarden. Now we all have land to farm, houses to live in, and food to eat. The head shopkeeper cherished the old and pitied the poor, so he found a place in the manor to settle Scholar and I and the other lonely old people down. Scholar and I then began to take care of the orphans in his own little courtyard. He taught the children how to read. With the help of our benefactor, they are all doing well. That's good, that's good. Qin Yining laughed heartily. One who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune in the future. We still have a long way to go. Liu Jiao smiled and said, "It's our fortune to be able to follow our benefactor." The Dowager Duchess angrily roared in shock. "Are you trying to coax me, this old woman? If they didn't come with their business, why would they come to see you? In any case, you're also the daughter of a family. Don't you want to care about the life and death of your family? We're now living under someone else's roof and almost don't have enough food to eat. You actually became stingy. Truly, girls favor outsiders. We've raised you for 15 years in vain." Under the Dowager Duchess's rage, she really didn't choose her words carefully. Second Foreign, Han, second young mistress, and Boss Xiaoji on the side all looked very embarrassed. They all wanted to say how long had it been since Qin Yining returned to the Fu. In the first 14 years, he didn't have a family to support him. After coming back for a year, he also suffered a lot. He was the most unlucky one. Qin Yining didn't get angry. He only sighed and said, "Dowager Duchess, please calm down. Why should I coax you? How much have I sacrificed for this family? Has Dowager Duchess forgotten?" The Dowager Duchess thought about the past. She thought about how Qin Yining was sent to the peace talks and then sent to the palace. Later, he was forced to cultivate in seclusion. He even almost entered the palace when he arrived in Dezhou. After all these things, he had contributed a lot to the family. The Dowager Duchess couldn't be so righteous. Qin Yining continued, "The Dian dynasty has fallen. Even the national treasury and the internal funds of the county king of Yin have now gone to Dezhou. Zhaoyan Agency is the business that the former imperial family gave to my maternal grandfather's family. It's recorded in the internal accounts of the Yin dynasty's imperial family. How could Master Zhong refute this? The officials of Dezhou reached out to take over. Master Zhong could only hand over his power and account. Otherwise, it would be considered treason. Although that's the case, you've been in business for so long. Didn't you save some personal funds?" "Personal funds? Your granddaughter does have some personal funds. But when she came, she was robbed. When she hurriedly escaped, she lost her belongings. Didn't Dowager Duchess pick up her belongings from your granddaughter's carriage at that time?" The Dowager Duchess frowned. "Do you think I would covet your belongings? The personal funds I'm talking about are the money in your accounts." Qin Yining raised his eyebrows and chuckled. "Your granddaughter understands Dowager Duchess's meaning. Your granddaughter also knows that the family's current situation is tense. However, the officials of Dezhou who were sent out aren't fools. When they handed over the accounts, they took away all the money. Master Zhong isn't your granddaughter's servant. He's just a shopkeeper that your granddaughter hired. Now that Zhaoyan Agency is gone, Master Zhong and your granddaughter no longer have a master-servant relationship. How much money your family has nothing to do with your granddaughter." Qin Yining's words were all reasonable. The Dowager Duchess really couldn't find any words to refute them. The Dowager Duchess didn't believe that Qin Yining didn't have any personal funds. However, she was still the Dowager Duchess. With her status, she couldn't search her granddaughter's body, right? Moreover, if she really searched Qin Yining, did other people have to search her as well? The Dowager Duchess waved her hand in irritation. "Since you don't have anything to do with Master Zhong, why do you still want to see him?" Qin Yining felt that the Dowager Duchess might have fainted from anger. Otherwise, how could she say such words that were full of loopholes and could be used against her? Is Dowager Duchess joking? Even if we don't have a master-servant relationship, we still know each other. Now that we're in Dezhou, we're considered fellow countrymen. It's right to go and see each other. Father often taught me how to conduct myself. Your granddaughter has never dared to forget this point. She curtsied and said, "Your granddaughter still has to entertain the guests. I won't disturb your rest." Qin Yining courteously bowed to second foreign, Han, second young mistress, and the others before leaving the Dowager Duchess's room. The Dowager Duchess's face alternated between green and red. Thinking that such a large sum of money no longer belonged to the family Qin because of the destruction of the Dian dynasty, she felt a burst of anger in her heart. When the money was needed, one would regret not having enough. Now, the family Qin was struggling to make ends meet. Her eldest son's whereabouts were unknown. They were living in the guest house and were being controlled everywhere. In the capital, they didn't even have their own home. How could the Dowager Duchess's heart not be anxious? Second foreign and Han, second young mistress, looked at each other and slipped out of the room while sticking close to the wall. Only Mammy Qin, Qin Huining, and eighth young miss were left in the room to serve. For a moment, the atmosphere was so oppressive that it seemed to solidify. Qin Yining handed over Lian Xiaozhou to Xian Yun and Qiu Lu to take care of. Then, he took Bing Tang and Ji Yun and left the guest house with Master Zhong and the others. Because he wasn't familiar with any place in the capital, Master Zhong simply said, "If boss doesn't mind, why don't you come to the small courtyard that I rented? My wife, son, and daughter-in-law are all there. It'll be convenient for us to eat and talk at home." "That's naturally good. I'm just afraid that I'll trouble Madam, my brothers, and my sisters-in-law." "What are you talking about? Since boss is willing to come, that's their dignity." Master Zhong was very pleased with how Qin Yining addressed his family members. Qin Yining followed him to the courtyard that was allocated to him at the west side of the city. We just arrived in the capital and haven't established ourselves yet. So, we arranged for someone to come to the capital and rent this place. We thought that once our family members arrived, we would be able to settle down. Standing in front of the mottled black courtyard door, Master Zhong smiled and explained to Qin Yining. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. The head shopkeeper has always been meticulous in his work. The group of people chatted and laughed as they entered the door. Qin Yining first went to greet the womenfolk of the Zhong family. He gave Madame Zhong and the grandmother a thorough etiquette before going to the study to speak with Master Zhong. Chapter 343. There's actually this much? Qin Yining said in surprise. I remember that even though we spent quite a bit of money back then, this amount of money is truly unexpected. That's right. When we bought the land, the price wasn't even 30% of what it was normally. No one would have thought that when de Zhou took over the Dian, it would be so peaceful. There was no burning, killing, looting, or massacring of the cities that everyone was afraid of. We met Prince Zhongshuan and were only able to analyze the situation afterwards. However, the commoners didn't know about it. At this point, Master Zhong couldn't help but laugh. Not only did we make a fortune from the land, but we also sold the shops that we mortgaged to Wang Yi. Wang Yi must have also made a fortune. When Qin Yining heard this, she nodded thoughtfully. Right now, she felt a bit guilty. She felt that she had made a fortune from the country's disaster and was being too unkind to the commoners. When Master Zhong saw Qin Yining's expression, he could guess what she was thinking. He couldn't help but sigh. Boss, you're too kind. At that time, everyone was starving, and the tragedy of the country being destroyed was right in front of us. Wasn't your original intention in buying the land so that the commoners could have some money to escape? Although that's the case, their land was sold cheaply. I always feel like I took advantage of them. That's not right. It wasn't that boss forced them to sell their land. It was that they willingly sold it at a low price in order to escape. In that situation, if boss didn't buy their land, they wouldn't have made a single cent. They would have abandoned their land and fled. After de Zhou took over, the ownerless land would have been confiscated. Then, when they returned to their hometowns, where would they find land to farm? With the land in our hands, we could even hire them and give them a job. Qin Yining blinked. She couldn't help but admit that Master Zhong was right. Master Zhong continued. Right now, most of the commoners who haven't starved to death have returned to the capital. Those who don't have houses and land don't have a livelihood. I made the decision to hire many commoners to farm for us. It could be considered as giving them a way out. Qin Yining sighed. Then he smiled and said, It's all in the past. It's useless to think about it now. Why don't we only take 70% of the rent this year and leave 30% for them so that everyone can rest and recuperate? Shopkeeper Zhong said in astonishment, Boss, 30% for each household is not a small sum when added together. I know. Qin Yining sighed and said, There's no end to the money in the world. No matter how much money I want, it's just a number in my hands. This 30% rent for each household is not enough to shake my foundation, but for everyone else, it can lessen a lot of the burden. I used to be a Dian, so I could do something for the people. Master Zhong looked at Qin Yining. After a long time, he said, This old man admires boss's righteousness. As he said this, he stood up and bowed to Qin Yining. You're too kind. No matter what I do, you'll have to put in some effort. Qin Yining stood up and returned the greeting. He said, Actually, I have another place in the capital that needs money. Boss, please speak. Master Zhong sat upright. Qin Yining smiled and said, Head shopkeeper must have heard some of the things that happened on our way here. My family's old madam and the others lost all the money they brought. Although my third uncle is a businessman, the road to the bottom of the mountain is long. Moreover, the profits from his business aren't that great. Therefore, I want to buy a residence in private and live with someone who doesn't seem to have anything to do with me. When my father returns to the capital, I'll sell it. This way, my family won't have no place to live. I've already asked Wang Yi to help me find a few places to live. However, too many things have happened recently, so I haven't had the time to choose one. Boss, don't worry. I'll help you with this matter. Master Zhong was silent for a moment before saying, there's a rumor going around that you and Wang Yi don't worry. Wang Yi and I are still the same as before. There are some things that we have no choice but to do. In the future, you can trust Wang Yi. Master Zhong's worried heart finally relaxed. He let out a long sigh and said, that's good, that's good. He watched with his own eyes as Qin Yining and Peng Xiao gradually got together. This pair of young people was truly a loving match. If they had to separate because of some real reason, that would be too sad. The two of them chatted for a while before a servant came to inform them that the meal had been prepared. Qin Yining ate the meal with the Zhong family, Lu Dehan, and Lu Jiuer. After the meal, they chatted for a while. He told Master Zhong that he could go to the Wang Fu to find Xie Yu or Su Weiji and ask them to pass on a message to Peng Xiao. Only then did he return to the guest house. The next day, Master Zhong went to the Wang Fu. Peng Xiao introduced Xie Yu and Su Weiji to Master Zhong. This is head shopkeeper Zhong Yuqing. He's Sister Yi's man. Xie Yu and Su Weiji bowed politely to Master Zhong. Their attitudes were extremely cautious. Master Zhong learned from Qin Yining that these two were Peng Xiao's most trusted advisors. Looking at their attitude towards her, she knew that Qin Yining's position in their hearts wasn't low. Master Zhong also politely returned the greeting. A few days later, Master Zhong and Xie Yu went out to look at houses. Among the 3 houses, they chose a 2-section house in the east of the city. They bought the house and put it under Lu Dehan's name. Qin Yining used the excuse of buying silk thread to take a look at the house. He felt that the location of the house was not bad and that it could be moved in after some repairs. He asked the craftsmen to tidy up the house first. They would tidy up the house when spring came. As time went by, there was still no news from Qin Huaiyuan, the Sun Clan, or Chao Yuqing. Qin Yining was getting more and more anxious. She messed up the selection. She didn't know if the person who kidnapped her father would do anything to harm her father. As for the 5 groups of Dayan officials who surrendered, they had already safely arrived in the capital. The guest house and the surrounding houses were filled with the families of the surrendered officials of the Yin dynasty. It was truly overcrowded. However, Li Qiqian only asked the people from the Ministry of Rights to treat these people well. If they wanted to buy a house, they could do so. If they didn't want to buy a house and didn't mind the small space, they could also squeeze into the guest house. Of course, if they didn't lack money, they could also look for an inn. With so many people in the capital, the business of the restaurants and inns improved. However, Li Qiqian didn't immediately reward them with official positions. Everyone stared blankly as they waited. After the little new year, Qin Yining was too worried about Qin Huaiyuan. Her mouth was full of blisters and sores, and even drinking water hurt. In the middle of the night, Peng Xiao climbed over the window to see Qin Yining when no one was around. He saw her holding her chin and staring blankly at the silk lamp. Her face, which had become a little chubby, was now so thin that her chin was sharp. He couldn't help but feel sorry for her. He said, "What happened? Haven't you eaten these past few days?" Qin Yining was startled by the sudden voice. She raised her eyes and glared at him. She took off the lampshade and blew out the lamp so that no one outside could see the figure in the room. Then she said in a low voice, "I haven't eaten these past few days. I'm always worried about my father and mother. Yesterday, I had a nightmare. I dreamed that they were killed by kidnappers. I was so scared that I woke up. After that, I couldn't sleep anymore." Chapter 344. On purpose. Qin Yining looked at Peng Xiao in shock. She shook her head and said, "I don't understand. Why didn't my father come back on purpose? Does he not want to care about the situation in the capital?" As soon as she said that, Qin Yining immediately shook her head and denied her own thoughts. "No, my father is a very responsible person. He would not do such an irresponsible thing. He would never leave his family and run away." Peng Xiao had seen her calm and intelligent side many times. It seemed that no matter what happened, she would be able to solve it calmly. Sometimes, she was so intelligent that he felt that his presence did not help at all. Now, seeing her loss, he felt that it was very novel. He also felt that the way she frowned and muttered to herself was very cute. He stretched out his long arm and hugged her. He said with a smile, "You're thinking too much. Actually, it's very simple. You just came to the capital and don't know much about Dezhou. You'll understand once I tell you." As he spoke, he picked up Qin Yining's teacup and took a sip of tea. Qin Yining did not mind his heavy arm on her shoulder, nor did she mind that he drank her tea. She looked at him with sparkling eyes. Pang Xiao was dazzled by her watery eyes. He almost could not hold himself back from kissing her. He swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Seeing that he did not speak for a long time, Qin Yining pushed him. "Tell me quickly." Pang Xiao was amused by her appearance and laughed out loud. He put his arm around her shoulder and said, "Okay, I'll tell you now. Actually, it's very simple. Dezhou has its own rules. I think that's what my father-in-law was waiting for." Qin Yining asked in confusion, "What's this inspection you mentioned?" "Your Majesty made a slight change, according to the old customs of Beiji, and set up a new rule for the examination of officials. All officials below the second rank in the capital who are not in the cabinet will have to go through an examination every 3 years." When Qin Yining heard this, he nodded slowly and said thoughtfully, "How exactly did the investigation work? Tell me in detail." Pang Xiao said, "There are 2 stages to the performance evaluation. In the first stage, the reference official has to submit a report. In the report, he cannot boast about his achievements. Instead, he has to look back on his shortcomings in the past 3 years, what he did wrong, what mistakes he made, etc. There must be no concealment or lying. After the report has been submitted, the Ministry of Personnel will conduct a unified examination. The report submitted in the first stage will be the main evidence for the examination. So, this year's inspection is about to begin." Pang Xiao smiled and said, "To be exact, it's a new year. Before the new year, the yamen was sealed. After the new year, this matter will begin." Qin Yining pondered for a moment, and his brows gradually relaxed. He let out a long sigh and said, "In that case, my father should be back after the new year, when the first phase of the inspection is over and the officials have handed in their reports." "Smart." Pang Xiao scratched the bridge of her nose. Qin Huaiyuan was the leader of the Dian's surrendered officials. In addition, the hatred between him and Pang Xiao for killing his father could be used by Li Qitian. Therefore, when he returned to the capital, he would definitely be put in an important position. Dian's surrendered officials came to the Zhou's capital on the Dian to inject new blood into the Zhou dynasty's imperial court. If he returned early, Your Majesty would have no choice but to start rewarding him based on his merits for the sake of his reputation. However, the imperial court had always been filled with people. Without good positions, the Yin dynasty's surrendered officials would have more positions. As long as Qin Huaiyuan did not return, Li Qitian would not be able to start rewarding him based on his merits. He stayed outside to wait for the inspection to begin. After the first stage of the examination, a large group of officials submitted their reports, stating their mistakes when they were officials. In this way, Li Qitian would have a target if he wanted to find a position for the Yin dynasty's surrendered officials. Qin Yining believed that Li Qitian would definitely put the surrendered officials of the Yin dynasty in important positions because of the current structure of the imperial court in Dezhou. The former officials of Beiji occupied most of the positions of the civil officials. Although Li Qitian's loyal nobles had military power, they could not compete with the civil officials. When the surrendered subjects of Great Yin dynasty came to Great Zhou, as they had lost their foundation, the only person they could rely on was Li Qitian, and their only option was to pledge their loyalty to Li Qitian. Presumably, Li Qitian also wanted to give the surrendered Dian officials higher positions. Qin Huaiyuan's disappearance gave Li Qitian a reason to temporarily not reward him and wait for a vacancy. "Really?" Qin Yining shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I was worried for nothing. Why didn't you tell me when you knew the inspection was about to begin?" "I forgot to tell you." Pang Xiao smiled. "Can you rest assured now?" Qin Yining nodded and said, "I already felt suspicious when there was no news for so long. Even if something really happened with my father's personality, he would definitely send a message to us. Now it seems that my father has made up his mind that I will know about the inspection and analyze when he will return." That's right. That's why it's a blessing for a father-in-law to have a smart daughter. Qin Yining blushed from his indirect praise and smiled. Why do you sound like you're smeared with honey? You're so good at coaxing people today. When have I ever not been a sweet talker? Why don't you try it? As he spoke, he deliberately moved closer to her. Qin Yining shyly pushed him away. You're not serious. Stop fooling around. Pang Xiao couldn't help but chuckle. He raised his hands in surrender. Okay. I won't fool around. Let's wait quietly for a while. During the new year, I'm afraid your majesty will have a lot of brotherly affection. In addition, your majesty went through untold hardships to find my mother. I won't be able to come and see you often. Qin Yining was shocked when she heard this. She sat up straight and asked, What mother? Pang Zhao's eyes were somewhat cold. His tone was full of sarcasm. What mother? Of course it's my father's legal wife. My mother was just a maidservant. She had me by accident. After knowing that my mother was pregnant, Madame Pang drove my mother away. She even tried to kill her on the way. Fortunately, my mother was smart and avoided her. Madame Pang should have died together with her. Who knew that your majesty would find this person for me? Now that the Pang family has been defeated and their only mother has been found, your majesty said that the Pang family has a little more hope. It could be said that the Pang family has a complete family. He told me to be filial to my mother. Do you want to take that mother back to the prince's mansion? What about Madame Dowager? If I really take her back, my mother was a maidservant of the Pang family. She wasn't even a concubine. Naturally, she is still a maidservant now. Pang Zhao's lips raised a sneer. Qin Yining shook his head and said, It's not appropriate. We can't let old master, Madame Dowager and Madame Dowager be bullied. In my opinion, it's still uncertain whether this mother is real or not. It's better to lock her up and investigate her slowly. It's not good to contradict your majesty face to face. However, it's easy for you to treat her in any way you want. Chapter 345. Qin Yining knew how much sadness he had under the surface. Hearing him belittle himself like this, she couldn't help but hold his hand with heartache. Since ancient times, heroes don't ask where they come from. Your wealth and honor were obtained by risking your life. You used those scars and military exploits to exchange. You don't need to inherit the Pang family's wealth and honor. You are the first generation of nobles who have made great achievements. I believe that if General Pang knew of your existence, he would be proud of you. Her voice was gentle, but her tone was unprecedentedly firm. Pang Xiao felt warm when he heard this. But he was also a mortal after all. He also had times when his heart was weak. Pang Xiao couldn't help but open up his thoughts to Qin Yining. Even so, I am an illegitimate child. When the official mother comes, the inner residence will be in chaos. I'm also worried that my mother, grandfather, and grandmother won't be able to do anything to her. Even if the official mother appears now, so what? She is the wife of the general's mansion, and you are Wang Yi of the Prince Zhongshuan's mansion. The general's mansion doesn't exist anymore, but the Prince Zhongshuan's mansion is in its heyday. How you want to treat her isn't it up to you? It doesn't matter if you are afraid that she will bully the old madam and the others. Just give her a courtyard so that she won't have to worry about food and drink. Don't tell me that His Majesty would ask you to place her in the first place. I think Your Majesty means this. Pang Xiao smiled bitterly and said, The general's mansion never knew of my existence before, and I wasn't recorded in the genealogy of the Pang family. If it weren't for the Pang family's banner, Your Majesty wouldn't have sent Mr. Zheng to find me. My mother also made up her mind to not tell me about my background for the rest of my life. She only wanted me to live a happy life without worrying about food and clothing. Qin Yining was very angry when he heard this. He couldn't help but say, Your Majesty is a man. How can you reach your hands into the inner residence again and again? Are you a man or not? Let's not talk about the 10 beauties in the house. Just how much did Li Qitian add fuel to the fire behind the Anyang royal princess? In addition, whenever Pang Xiao went to war, he would often invite the Yao clan, Yao Qinggu, and Ma clan to stay in the palace for a while. On the surface, it seemed like he was helping his brothers to be filial to their elders, but in reality, he was simply holding a hostage by his side. If Li Qiqian was truly capable of scheming and overt schemes, Qin Yining would truly admire him. However, Li Qiqian's actions left Qin Yining with a bad impression. That doesn't matter. As long as we remain vigilant at all times, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. As for who was the one who let down who and who was wronged, that's the matter of the previous generation. General Feng is no longer here, so it's meaningless to fuss over these things. The most important thing is to live well in the future. When Pang Xiao heard this, he nodded slightly and tightened his grip on Qin Yining's arm. The two of them quietly leaned against each other and whispered to each other. After a while, Pang Xiao quietly left. In the following time, the entire capital was immersed in the joyous atmosphere of the approaching New Year. For the Dezhou dynasty, the world was at peace and the country was at peace. The Taitan was busy with internal strife and had no time to disturb them. The north had been peaceful for a long time. Most of Dian had been merged into Dezhou's territory, and the south had also been pacified. This year's Dezhou dynasty was filled with good things. Li Qiqian was also flushed with success and was in high spirits. However, for the Dian dynasty's people, this year was the most difficult one to endure. This was because this was their first new year after the fall of their country. From now on, they would no longer have any foundation. Just like how they were living in the guest house now. Even if they became officials in the future and bought a house, they would still be floating duckweed in Dezhou. On New Year's Eve, the family Qin dynasty's people had originally discussed whether or not they should celebrate New Year's with the county king of Yin, his wife, Lord Li, and Lord Gu. However, after careful analysis, the Yuchi Yin would probably be a sparrow trapped in a golden cage in Dezhou. They would never be able to fly again. Even if Li Qiqian was drunk, he would not give the Yuchi Yin any real power or official position. Not only did this person have no future, but if they were too close to him, they might even bring disaster to their own family. As such, the entire guest house was deathly silent. Only the occasional sound of firecrackers could be heard from the streets outside. The family Qin dynasty's people gathered in the main room of the small courtyard for New Year's Eve dinner. There was a dazzling array of delicacies on the table. With Li Qiqian, the benevolent ruler, taking special care of the surrendered subjects, the chef had put in a lot of effort to prepare the New Year's Eve dishes. Although he was not in the mood to specially prepare southern delicacies for the Dian people, the dishes were still delicious. However, the whole family did not have much of an appetite. Because of the so-called reunion dinner, the whole family did not reunite. The Dowager Duchess looked at the whole family sitting together in a circle and sighed. Last year on New Year's Eve, who would have thought that we would be celebrating New Year's like this year? The second madam held the Dowager Duchess's arm and patted it comfortingly. Dowager Duchess, take care of yourself. Don't think about these unhappy things. How can I be happy? I don't know if Brother Meng is doing well or if he's still alive. Our family managed to escape natural disasters and man-made disasters and arrived at the Great Zhou dynasty. We thought that our future would be smooth and safe, but Brother Meng was kidnapped and taken away. We want to agree to the kidnapper's conditions, but Sister Yi can't enter the palace. As the Dowager Duchess spoke, sorrow welled up in her heart. She covered her face and sobbed. When the whole family saw this, they all showed grief. Eighth young miss and Qin Huaining also shed tears. Qin Yining frowned and said, "Don't cry, Dowager Duchess. Today is New Year's Eve, a joyous day. We can't cry. You heartless little wench. I don't even know how your parents are now, and you won't allow me to cry? I think you are simply cold-hearted and not willing to worry about your parents." The Dowager Duchess slammed the table and sobbed. Why is my life so bitter? How'd I get involved in this kind of thing? The Dowager Duchess's crying became louder and louder, causing the second madam, Han's second young mistress, and the group of maidservants to also cry. Qin Yining frowned and looked at second old master and third old master. He said, "Second uncle, third uncle," crying so loudly at this time, "Aren't you afraid of offending your majesty? How many pairs of eyes are staring at our family? Those who know, It's because the Dowager Duchess is worried about her son. That's why she's crying. Those who don't know will think that we're die-hard loyalists of the Yin dynasty, crying for the fall of the country on New Year's Eve. In the future, our family won't be able to live in the Dezhou dynasty. Although Qin Yining's words were directed at second old master, his voice wasn't soft. It was equivalent to indirectly reprimanding all the womenfolk in the room. When the Dowager Duchess heard that she would offend the imperial family, her crying became softer. The rest of the womenfolk also felt anxious and didn't dare to cry loudly. Second old master was also very impatient with the Dowager Duchess's behavior. He even admired how Qin Huayuan could coax the Dowager Duchess to be well-behaved with just a few words. Second old master said, "Sister E is right. We have to pay more attention to our words and actions now. Moreover, Sister E just secretly told me that she has good news to tell the family today." The Dowager Duchess wiped her tears and looked at Qin Yining unhappily. "What good news do you have to say?" Chapter 346. Are you serious? When the old madam heard this, she stood up excitedly and grabbed Qin Yining's hand. She asked, "Did your father write a letter?" Without waiting for Qin Yining to reply, the old madam anxiously said, "He's really heartless. Why didn't he write a letter to me? He didn't even tell me that he was safe. Could it be that he doesn't care about me, his mother?" The old madam's tears gushed out again. Mammy Qin hurriedly took a handkerchief to wipe the old madam's tears. Qin Yining looked helplessly at second old master, then looked away. Second old master knew that it would be bad if he didn't speak now. So he said, "Mother, what are you saying? You know eldest brother's temper the best. If he really wrote a letter, how could he not send his regards to you first?" "No letter?" The old madam was stunned and forgot to cry. She said in surprise, "Could it be that Sister E heard about it from somewhere else? Is your father doing well? Where is he?" "I also don't know where my father is, but I believe that with his wisdom, he's definitely doing well." "What do you mean? What's going on?" Seeing that the old madam was anxious and was about to cry again, Qin Yining hurriedly told her about Jing Cha. Seeing that the womenfolk still didn't understand, she looked to second old master for help. Qin Huan wasn't at home, and second old master was the backbone of the family, so his words were more convincing. Therefore, after hearing second old master's analysis, the entire family was delighted. Are you serious?" The old madam's eyes were bright, and she pointed at second old master with a smile on her face. Second old master smiled bitterly and said, "Of course I'm serious. How could the sun deceive you? Good. This new year, there's finally something to be happy about." The old madam's tears turned into laughter. She was finally in a good mood and let out a long sigh. The atmosphere immediately eased. The old madam really loved Qin Huayuan to the bone. The others felt that Qin Huayuan was the backbone of the family when he was at home. Second master felt a little sour in his heart. Logically speaking, during this period of time, he had been busy at home, and the family was used to looking for him to make decisions, whether big or small. He could be considered to have done his best. Who would have thought that just the news of Qin Huayuan's imminent return would be more exciting than having someone enlighten him in front of him? However, on second thought, Qin Huayuan was coming back. He also felt that his heart was clear and at ease. His eldest brother was upright and had both talent and integrity. He did not favor anyone in the family, nor did he suppress anyone. If anyone was in trouble, he would help them. With such a good elder brother by his side, second master also felt at ease. Just as the Qin family was having a happy and harmonious time, Yu Qiyin, who lived next to them, was standing in the empty courtyard with a black sable collar cloak draped over her shoulders, looking up at the bright fireworks in the night sky. The sparkling and translucent snow sprinkled down, forming a faint layer of sparkling and translucent snow on his shoulders. The specks of white snow on the black fur collar were like the frost on his temples. He was a young man who was not yet 25 years old, but his black hair had already turned white. The wrinkles between his eyebrows had deepened, like a dead knot that could not be untied. A paper umbrella covered his head, blocking the light snow for him, but also blocking his line of sight. He turned his head and saw Li Yin, wearing a white fox fur coat, looking at him with a smile. Beside her was Gu Chang, wearing a light pink satin coat. "Royal Prince, the courtyard is cold. Please go back. Catching a cold is not a joke." Li Yin's voice was gentle and slow, very much like the person who also liked to wear a white fox fur coat. Gu Chang also said, "You didn't eat much for dinner. In any case, you should eat more." Yu Yin shook his head and pushed aside Li Yin's paper umbrella, still looking up at the sky. The fireworks had already disappeared. Only a few faint traces of smoke could be seen in his pitch-black eyes. He wanted to see the fireworks, but he didn't enjoy it to his heart's content. It was as if his fate was always not right. There were all kinds of reasons that made him not right, but what could he do? Right now, he was only a royal prince, and it was impossible for him to have any real power or freedom for the rest of his life. If he wanted to live, then he had to be obedient under Li Qiqian's eyes. He couldn't overstep his boundaries, and he couldn't let Li Qiqian have any suspicions. For the rest of his life, he could only be a sparrow in a cage. Once the master got tired of him, what awaited him would definitely not be freedom. Yu Yin looked up at the sky in a daze. The silver strands mixed in his black hair were especially obvious under the light of the lanterns. Li Yin's heart ached so much that her nose turned sour, and she almost cried. No matter what wrong her father had done to the imperial family, now that Dian had perished, everything had become a thing of the past. She had made up her mind to accompany Yu Yin for the rest of her life. They only wanted to be a married couple. It was enough that she could serve him like a wife of an ordinary family, give birth to children for him, and take care of the inner residents. As for the other concubines, they had all died on the way here. The only one left, Gu Chang, had also been reduced from an imperial concubine to a concubine. Even if she gave birth, the child she gave birth to would be a concubine. So what if she didn't become the empress? She was satisfied with this kind of peaceful life. After experiencing so many life and death situations, Li Yin felt that she could accept it, as long as her husband was fine, and her maternal family, Duke Ong's residence, was also fine. What else could she ask for? "Your Highness, don't be sad. When everything settles down, we can live a good life, have children, and live a peaceful life. Isn't that good?" Li Yin persuaded with a smile. Gu Chang also said, "Yes, I heard that fourth Miss Qin's reputation outside was ruined by Prince Zhongshuan. Prince Zhongshuan forcibly took her away and raped her. Miss Qin is also pitiful. When your Highness settles down, you can go to their family and ask them to bring her over as a concubine. You don't dislike her and give her a way out. I think the family Qin won't object. In the future, we sisters can have more companions." Gu Chang was bright and moving. When she smiled, she was very likable. Her words were reasonable, and Yu Qian's originally dark heart seemed to have a few rays of light. Li Yin frowned and looked at Gu Chang with gritted teeth, but she didn't dare to show her emotions. Whether it was the empress or an ordinary legal wife, she could only nod her head if her husband wanted to take a concubine. Otherwise, she would be jealous. Gu Chang raised her eyebrows proudly. Anyway, she had changed from an imperial concubine to a concubine. What else could she lose? Yu Yin had always been indifferent to her. Instead of letting Li Yin be proud, it was better to make Qin eating. At that time, everyone would have a hard time. Yu Yin said lightly, "Let's go back." Then he turned and went back to his room first. Li Yin and Gu Chang looked at each other and gave each other a contemptuous smile. Then they followed him in. New Year's Eve passed, and all families lived in peace. On the first day of a new year, Huzi quietly came to give Qin Yining 3 big red envelopes, saying that they were from Madame Dowager, Old Master, and Old Madam. Qin Yining asked about paying Zhao's legal mother, Madame Zhou. Huzi only smiled and said that there was nothing wrong with it. On the 5th day of the new year, the Yamen opened its seal, and the investigation began in full swing. On the 15th day of the new year, the weather was fine. Qin Yining was teaching Lian Xiaozhou how to read. Suddenly, there was a shout in the yard. "He's back. Master Ho is back. Master Ho is back." Qin Yining suddenly stood up and almost knocked the blue and white porcelain brush on the table to the ground. He lifted his legs and ran out. As soon as he arrived at the yard, he saw Qin Huan, who was wearing a gray fur cloak, leading the way into the yard. Chapter 347. Qin Huayuan had lost a lot of weight, and his sunken cheeks could be seen on his bearded face. However, the aura around him was steadier and sharper than before. Even if he had a smile on his face, the sharpness in his eyes couldn't be ignored. Qin Yining knew that his father must have experienced a lot of things while he was away. Seeing Qin Yining dashing out while lifting her skirt, Qin Huayuan's smile dimmed his sharpness. He patted his beloved daughter's shoulder with his big hand and said with a smile, "I knew you would be safe and sound." Qin Yining gave a big smile. "Father, have you been well these days? Where's my mother?" Qin Huayuan smiled and said, "Your mother is behind." Just as he finished speaking, he saw second Madam and Mammy Qin supporting the old Madam as they rushed over. "Brother Meng, my brother Meng, you finally come back. Why didn't you say anything and disappear without a trace? You're taking Mother's life." The old Madam shouted and threw herself at Qin Huayuan. She hugged him and wailed incessantly, causing everyone's nose to ache. Qin Huayuan immediately knelt in front of the old Madam. His voice was trembling. "Mother, this son is unfilial and has made you worry. You can hit me or scold me, but please don't hurt your body by crying." The old Madam shook her head repeatedly and sobbed silently. She hugged Qin Huayuan and couldn't say a complete sentence. Qin Yining smiled as he watched the scene of mother and son reuniting. He thought of the Sun clan and hurriedly turned around to leave. As soon as he left the courtyard, he saw the Sun clan wearing a thick fur collar cloak and walking side by side with Chao Yuqing. Behind them were Mother Jean and two unfamiliar maidservants, all of whom were carrying large bundles. "Mother!" Qin Yining shouted and rushed to the Sun clan to hug her tightly. "Mother, you're back." The members of the Sun clan also hugged Qin Yining tightly and said in a choked voice, "We're back, we're back. I've always been worried about your situation. Your father said that with your intelligence, you would definitely be able to turn misfortune into blessing. Sure enough, your father didn't lie to me. You're really here. Mother, what can happen to me? I'm worried about you." Qin Yining held the Sun clan's hand and looked her up and down carefully, as if he was checking to see if she had lost a single strand of hair. Mother Jean smiled and said, "Fourth Miss, don't worry. Madam is doing well these days." Qin Yining nodded and turned to Chao Yuqing with a bright smile. "Concubine Chao, thank you so much." Chao Yuqing had been standing quietly by the side, watching other mothers and daughters reunite. She felt a little lonely and desolate. She didn't expect Qin Yining to take the initiative to thank her. She felt flattered. "Fourth Miss, you don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what I should do." Chao Yuqing smiled gently. Qin Yining shook his head and said, "No matter what the reason is, when we were in danger that day, you spared no effort to save my father and mother. I saw it that day. If it weren't for you, my father and mother would have been in danger." Chao Yuqing blushed and shook her head. "Fourth Miss, you're exaggerating." The members of the Sun clan said at this time, "You're worthy of this. If it weren't for you and your subordinates, how could we have been safe?" Chao Yuqing smiled and said, "Madam, you're treating me like an outsider." Qin Yining saw that the Sun clan wasn't as hostile to Chao Yuqing as before. Chao Yuqing was also very respectful to the Sun clan, so he was relieved. It was impossible for his father to abandon Chao Yuqing. Ignoring Chao Yuqing's feelings for his father, just the fact that she had saved his life several times when he was in danger was enough to repay. Moreover, the silver mask spies that Chao Yuqing led were now employed by his father. The relationship between them was inextricably linked, and it wasn't something that could be severed with a single blow. Since they were destined to be friends, it was better for everyone to be harmonious than to be angry all day long. Now that they were into Zhou, it was different from when they were in the Yin dynasty. In the end, the families still had to stick together so that they wouldn't give any opportunities to be taken advantage of. It seemed that after going through so much hardship, his mother had changed a lot. Qin Yining and Chao Yuqing, one on the left and one on the right, accompanied the members of the Sun clan as they walked towards the courtyard where the Sun clan resided. At this time, The door to the courtyard on the right was pushed open. Eunuch Lu poked his head out and saw Qin Yining. He hurriedly lowered his voice in surprise and said, "Miss Qin, did something good happen in your family? Did Grand Preceptor Qin find them?" Qin Yining smiled and nodded. "Yes, my father and mother are finally back." "That's great." Eunuch Lu was so happy that he spun around a few times before running back in a daze. "This servant will go and tell the emperor, the royal prince." As he spoke, he had already walked far away. Qin Yining could still faintly hear Eunuch Lu's excited and shrill voice in the courtyard. Qin Yining couldn't help but smile. Although they couldn't get too close to the Yuqi Yin due to their identities, they were all dying people. In addition, the Yuqi Yin and his father had a teacher-student relationship, so they still cared about him. Qin Yining, the members of the Sun clan, and Xiao Yuqing returned to the courtyard and bowed to the Dowager Duchess. Then, they chatted again. As they spoke, Second Master, Third Master, Qin Yu, and Qin Han also received the news and rushed back. They all surrounded Qin Huaiyuan and asked him all sorts of questions. The scene was very lively. The Dowager Duchess laughed happily. "I haven't been this happy in a long time. Now that the whole family is here, we should celebrate. Mother is right. I'll go and tell the kitchen to add more dishes." Even if the family was tight on money, this meal didn't make a difference. Third Master happily went to give orders. The Dowager Duchess pulled Qin Huaiyuan's hand and sat next to her. She couldn't help but size him up. "Brother Meng has lost weight. You all suffered outside. Previously, the bandits said that if I didn't send Sister Yi to participate in the selection, they would kill you and your wife. Your second brother and your daughter both said that it's not appropriate for our family to send a girl to the palace at this time. On one hand, I was worried about you. I was afraid that you would be harmed because I didn't send Sister Yi to the selection. On the other hand, I had to think about our family." When the Dowager Duchess said this, her tears fell again. However, she wiped them away with her sleeve. "Now that you're back, I can be at ease." "That's right. Why did they let you out?" Qin Huaiyuan frowned slightly and said, "How could there be a kidnapping? We weren't kidnapped. I'm afraid that Mother was deceived." The room was silent. Everyone was very surprised and confused. Second Master shook his head and said, "You were deceived? If we insisted on sending Sister Yi to participate in the selection that day, we might have fallen into their trap." The Dowager Duchess reacted and angrily slammed the tea table. "These people are simply inhumane." Qin Huaiyuan knew that a lot of trouble had occurred during the time he wasn't at home. Qin Yining interrupted and asked, "Father, where did you go during this time? Why didn't Pang Xiao find any news of him when he sent so many people to look for him?" Qin Huaiyuan said, "When we escaped that day, we found a nearby village to stay. I wanted to observe for a while, so I stayed in the same place. When I got the news that Emperor Zhou had arranged for people to bring you back to the capital and everyone had left, we slowly set out. We walked and took a look along the way. When we arrived at the capital, we didn't enter the capital. Instead, we went straight to the north and went to a few cities that intersected with the Taitan border to explore the terrain. Time passed unknowingly. Later, I heard some news from the imperial court in Zhou, so I decided to stay outside for a while and come back when everything was settled. If it wasn't for the Taitan's internal strife, I would have gone to the Taitan to take a look. It turned out to be like this. Father actually took the opportunity to take his wife and concubine on a trip. No wonder Pang Xiao couldn't find him. It turned out that Father was already in a Taitan border city. Pang Xiao's people all went to the road they came from and the nearby villages to look for him. How could they find him? The Dowager Duchess's mouth twitched when she heard this. She pinched Qin Huaiyuan hard and said, "Since that's the case, why didn't you send a letter home? Do you know how worried we were about you? You went on a trip by yourself. Do you know what kind of life we're living?" This time, it was Qin Huaiyuan's turn to be surprised. "I already ordered someone to deliver a letter. He didn't come?" The Dowager Duchess was also stunned. "I didn't see the person who delivered the letter. Who did you order to deliver the letter?" "A new attendant I took in along the way. Perhaps there was an accident on the way, or maybe he was greedy for money and ran away with the travel expenses. It's hard to say. Qin Huayuan smiled bitterly and said, I was still enjoying myself outside. I thought that since everyone knew that I was fine, I wouldn't be in a hurry to come back for a few days. Who knew that you didn't get the letter? Everyone looked at each other and then laughed in the end. They didn't expect that the meticulous Qin Huayuan would have such a blunder. Fortunately, eldest brother came back, second master said. A lot of things have happened recently. Without eldest brother by our side, we don't have a backbone. Mother was worried about you and couldn't eat. Fortunately, Sister E heard about the news of the Peking investigation into Zhou and told us in advance. That's why we were able to live peacefully until now. That's right. In the end, Sister E didn't guess incorrectly. You really did come back during the Peking investigation. The Dowager Duchess was happy to see her precious son. Even the things that Qin Yining did were pleasing to the eye. Qin Huayuan didn't expect second master to mention the Peking investigation. Immediately, he looked at Qin Yining in surprise and smiled approvingly at her. In the end, she was his daughter. She was still as sensitive to politics as before. She wouldn't be timid just because she was in a different country. Qin Yining blushed under her father's approving gaze. She smiled shyly and said, Father's return is better than anything else. In the future, as long as our family works together, I don't believe that we won't be able to live well. That's right. Everyone nodded in agreement. Ever since they came to the Zhou, they felt unprecedentedly happy. Qin Huayuan looked at his family emotionally. They had gone through so much hardship. Now that they could be reunited after such a long journey, it was already a gift from the heavens. Qin Huayuan was deeply moved. Just as he was about to speak, a maidservant's voice sounded from outside. The County Prince of Yin is here. As soon as she finished speaking, the curtain at the door was lifted. Yu Qiyin, draped in a black sable fur cloak, hurriedly entered. He stood by the door and saw Qin Huayuan. He quietly looked him up and down before letting out a long sigh. Chapter 348. This was the first time the two of them had met face-to-face in Zhou after being separated for a long time. Yu Qiyin gazed at Qin Yining with infatuation. He saw her long, shapely eyebrows, sparkling eyes, jade-like nose, and luscious lips. She seemed to be in a daze. Her every frown and smile attracted admiration. Uncontrollable throbbing in his chest, he almost blurted out a concerned greeting. However, Yu Qiyin still retained some rationality. He realized that there were many people around, and it wasn't convenient for him to say goodbye. He could only suppress his feelings and turn to greet Qin Huayuan. How have you been these days, Grand Preceptor Qin? You haven't returned for a long time. There have been rumors in the outside world. Zhen, this king was very worried after hearing about it. Qin Huayuan looked at Yu Qiyan's mottled temples and saw his concerned expression. He felt a wave of sadness in his heart. As usual, he performed the formal etiquette of a ruler and his subject. It's my fault for making the prince worry. Grand Preceptor Qin, please rise quickly. Yu Qiyin saw him being so courteous, and she was moved. After the collapse of the Yin dynasty, his former subjects who came to the Zhou might not be promoted, but each of them had a brighter future than him. He was destined to be a bird in a cage for the rest of his life. He could no longer help them in their careers. However, Qin Huayuan's attitude towards him was still as respectful and intimate as it was in Dian. Other than the change in the way he addressed him, everything else seemed to have not changed. For a moment, Yu Qiyin was very disappointed, but also very moved. The Zhou is more suitable for Grand Preceptor Qin to fulfill your ambitions than Dian. In the future, Grand Preceptor Qin must be diligent. You must not lose face in front of the people of the Zhou as Dian people. In the future, I will have to trouble Grand Preceptor Qin to take care of the subjects who came from Dian. Yu Qiyan's words made everyone present feel uncomfortable. They couldn't help but sigh at Yu Qiyan's kindness. Whether or not his words came from his heart, his concern for Qin Huayuan was real. Qin Huan bowed respectfully and said, I will listen to your instructions. I will do my best. With your words, I can rest assured. Seeing that there were only women here and that his every move was being monitored by others, it was not convenient for him to stay for long. Therefore, He only greeted the old madam with a few words before taking his leave. Before he left, Yu Yin hesitated again and again. In the end, he couldn't resist the deep longing and expectation. He turned around and said, "Miss C, I have something to ask you." Qin Yining frowned slightly. She would never forget the bad memories of being forced by this person in the palace. When she saw that Yu Qian's hair had turned white at such a young age, although she sighed for him, it was impossible for her to not have any grudges. However, this was no longer the palace of Dian. Yu Qian's every move was being monitored by others. He probably wouldn't do anything to her. With that in mind, Qin Yining looked inquiringly at Qin Huaiyuan. When he saw Qin Huaiyuan nod, Qin Yining followed Yu Qian out. When the old madam saw this, she was in a good mood and teased. "It seems that the county king of Yin still has feelings for our sister Yi. Back then, Sister Yi did not become the empress because they were not fated to be together. Now that Sister Yi's reputation is ruined, it would be a good thing if she could become the county king of Yan's concubine." When Qin Huaiyuan heard this, he frowned. Just as he was about to speak, the Sun Clan spoke first. "The old madam's words are reasonable, but Sister Yi is not an ordinary girl. Her marriage should be decided by the old master." The old madam was speechless for a moment. When she thought of their family situation in the Zhou dynasty and how they had to rely on their eldest son everywhere, she really couldn't use her status as an elder to oppress others. However, the old madam had never liked the Sun Clan. Naturally, she wouldn't give her any face. She immediately said sarcastically, "It's true that a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. You used to be a one-track-minded person, but now you've learned to involve Brother Meng." They had just returned, and the old madam was already provoking them. The Sun Clan had never been people who could swallow their anger. The moment they opened their mouths, they wanted to argue with her. However, Chao Yuqing took the Sun Clan's arm first and pinched her suggestively. "The old madam is in the spring and autumn period. You should take good care of yourself. Always looking for trouble at the slightest thing will harm your body." The old madam didn't expect that Chao Yuqing would speak for the Sun Clan. Shouldn't the wife and the concubine be at odds with each other? After going out for a while, they actually targeted her together. In the past, the old madam flattered Chao Yuqing a lot because of Chao Yuqing's family background. Now that the Dian court was gone, Chao Yuqing had long become rootless duckweed. She was only a concubine of her son. Why would the old madam care? You really know the rules. When the master speaks, is there a place for you, a servant, to speak? Chao Yuqing raised her eyebrows and sneered. "From the beginning, when I entered your family, I was ordered to cooperate with Qin Darren and cooperate with him. Being a concubine is just a cover-up. Now, I have already asked Darren for a concubine release. I am no longer the nominal servant of your family, but Darren's imperial bodyguard captain. If the old madam isn't afraid that one day the silver masked spies will come late at night, please show some respect." In the end, Chao Yuqing was a person who had seen blood. When she looked at people seriously, it was really frightening. Thinking of the time when Chao Yuqing led the silver masked spies to fight against the enemy in Dian and the legendary silver masked spies, the old madam couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. She blinked her eyes and couldn't say a word. When the Sun Clan heard this sentence, they were still in shock and forgot to react for a moment. The scene instantly quieted down. Only then did Qin Huaiyuan say, "I have my own arrangements for Sister Yi's matter. Mother doesn't need to worry." Qin Yining was his only pearl, so he didn't like the old madam's words. That was why he allowed the women folk to bicker a bit. However, he was still her son, so it wasn't good for him to anger his mother too much. Qin Yining didn't know what was going on inside the room. At this time, she was walking side by side with Yu Qian on the hand-folding veranda. They were slowly walking towards the front of the courtyard. The two's attendants were following behind them from a distance. Yu Qian said, "Your complexion has been pretty good recently. I think your body should be fine now, right?" When Qin Yining was in the prince's fu, she ate medicinal cuisine, abalone, and sea cucumber. Now, her body was a lot better. "Thank you for your concern, Royal Prince. I'm fine." Royal Prince, please take care of yourself. Qin Yining slowed down her steps and once again trailed behind Yu Yin by half a body. When Yu Yin saw her like this, he also slowed down his steps and insisted on walking alongside her. Whether I take care of myself or not, this is the end of my life. I'm just worried about you. Qin Yining felt that these words were too ambiguous. They didn't have any relationship, so what was there to be worried about? Thank you, Royal Prince. Seeing her reply so dryly, Yu Yin helplessly said, "You're still like this. It seems like you still hold a grudge against me. Your words are too serious." Qin Yining continued to be distant and courteous as she replied. Yu Yin stopped in his tracks and looked at her seriously. "I know about what happened to you a few days ago. Don't worry, I will discuss it with your father later. You don't have to worry about ruining your reputation and not being able to marry into a good family. Why don't you come with me? Although I don't have the chance to make a meteoric rise, I can still respect and love you for the rest of my life and give you a warm family." At this point, Yu Yin nervously clenched his fists and said anxiously, "Sister E, let me take care of you, okay?" Qin Yining frowned. Before she could answer, a cold snort suddenly came from the entrance of the courtyard. Royal Prince Yin sure is in a good mood. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound. Who else could it be other than Pang Xiao, dressed in a purple brocade robe and a cloak with a silver fox fur collar? Percent Mini Theater. Pang Xiao. I've been poached. I'm so happy. Chapter 349. Qin Yining was rather surprised that Pang Xiao had come in person. Logically speaking, Pang Xiao should have avoided this place to avoid the emperor's suspicion that he had eased relations with the Yin dynasty's surrendered subjects. However, Qin Yining thought for a while and understood a little. Pang Xiao wasn't a stupid person, so he had probably prepared a show in advance before he came here. Pang Xiao's eyes were burning with rage as he glared at Yu Yin. His eyes were almost burning through his frail body. It seems that the county prince of Yin is quite comfortable being the ruler of a fallen country. That one sentence was like a knife stabbing into his heart. Yu Yin's face turned red as he glared at Pang Xiao. He was so angry that his entire body trembled. Pang Xiao laughed coldly. The only one among the men of the Yu family that was acceptable was the Prince of Ning. He was a real man. He knew that his country was about to fall, and he would rather die on the battlefield than admit defeat. Although he died under my blade, and I have the scars he gave me, I still admire and respect him from the bottom of my heart. As for you, Pang Xiao slowly walked closer. Whether it was his height or his aura, he suppressed Yu Yin so much that he could not raise his head. If you were a real man, you would have killed yourself to thank your ancestors. That way, I would have respected you for being a real man. You are a different kind of person from that incapable ruler. You've done well. Not only do you not feel the shame of being the ruler of a fallen country, you still have the nerve to flirt here? Do you still think you are the emperor? Although I don't want this woman, why don't you take a look in a mirror and see what you look like now? Take care of people? You should take care of yourself first. Pang Xiao's voice was not loud, but every word hit Yu Qian's heart like a heavy hammer. It was about to turn his heart into meat paste. His face was burning. There was a voice in his head that agreed with Pang Xiao's words. He was indeed as he said. He had no courage at all. He also knew that he did not have the courage of his imperial uncle. He wanted to refute, but he could not find the right words. This was de Zhou's territory. He was no longer the emperor, but a county prince. The arrogant and domineering person in front of him was a prince of a different surname. He had entered the cabinet because of his military achievements and was able to participate in important decisions. With such a comparison, he was simply too ashamed to show his face. Qin Yining saw Pang Xiao was so mean and provocative. He could not help but feel angry and amused. Pang Xiao was only 30% of her acting was 70% was probably due to jealousy. She was already an adult, and she hadn't done anything out of line. Yu Yin had only asked a question, and with his current status, he couldn't do anything about it. How could this person be so calculative, like a child whose candy had been snatched away? Qin Yining looked at Pang Xiao with a serious expression, but her beautiful eyes were full of smiles. Pang Xiao felt his face heat up from her gaze. He also felt that he had gone a bit overboard, so he glared at her. If he had not coincidentally met her today, he would not have deeply understood how popular his sister Yi was. When they attacked Dian, the Yuchi Yin tried to please Qin Yining in every possible way. He even forcefully brought her into the palace with the intention of making her his. If he had not thought of that idea, Qin Yining would have become one of the women in the Yuchi Yan's harem. This silly girl, she still had the mood to look at him and smile? Although that was what he thought, Pang Zhao's anger was mostly dissipated by her gentle gaze. He coughed and coldly glared at Qin Yining. What? Have you finally found a way out after leaving this king's mansion? Don't worry. If there is really someone who does not care about your past and is willing to marry you, this king will definitely give you a big gift to add to your dowry. It will not be a waste for us to know each other, but you can't become someone's concubine, right? If the woman that this king likes becomes someone's concubine, isn't that self-deprecating? Don't you dare go too far. Yu Qiyin saw that Pang Xiao was humiliating Qin Yining and couldn't take it anymore. If I report you, I don't know what your Majesty's decision will be. Your Majesty's decision is a matter for the future. It is not up to you to say anything. Pang Xiao laughed mockingly. Yu Qiyin was so angry that his face and ears turned red. Just as he was about to argue, Qin Huayin, who had received little Lu's report, arrived at the courtyard. Prince Zhongshuan, what brings you here? Qin Huaiyuan had a smile on his face, and his voice was gentle. Pang Xiao raised his eyebrows and said, It's nothing. I just came to visit and greet an old friend. His attitude was very arrogant, which was completely different from when he met Qin Huaiyuan before. Qin Huaiyuan's eyes narrowed slightly. He already had many guesses in his heart. The Sun Clan, the second master, his wife, and the third master followed closely behind. However, they were dissatisfied with Pang Zhao's disrespectful attitude, especially the Sun Clan. In Dian, Pang Xiao used to call her mother-in-law. For the sake of Qin Yining, he did everything he could to flatter her incisively and vividly. However, in such a short time, this person changed his attitude like flipping a book. When they came back, they had heard some rumors about the relationship between Qin Yining and Pang Xiao. The Sun Clan did not take it seriously. Now, it seemed that she had been too optimistic. The Sun Clan was so angry that their faces and ears turned red. They suppressed their anger and did not speak. Qin Huaiyuan's attitude was still gentle. He said politely, I see. I didn't know when Prince Zhongshuan and the county king of Yin became friends. Moreover, there's a new way for friends to greet each other. Or is this the custom of the capital? This old man has little talent and knowledge. This is the first time I have experienced it. Pang Xiao could not help but sigh inwardly at Qin Huaiyuan's watertight words. If he became enemies with this person, his life would be very difficult. Although he thought so, he still looked very arrogant. Lord Qin, you will have many opportunities to experience it in the future. When Qin Huaiyuan saw Pang Zhao's attitude and tone, he could already confirm that Pang Zhao's attitude was indeed problematic. Even if a person wanted to change, they would not change so much in such a short time. He looked at Qin Yining again. As a father, he naturally knew about the relationship between Qin Yining and Pang Xiao. Pang Zhao's provocation did not reach Qin Yining's eyes. He did not know what these two children were plotting. Qin Huaiyuan was certain of his guess. He shook his head in amusement and said with a face full of anger, Prince Zhongshuan is busy. This old man will not keep you any longer. Please. Qin Huaiyuan cupped his hands and called for Qin Yining. Sister Yi, let's go back. Qin Yining bowed her head and followed behind her family. When Yu Qiyin saw her lonely appearance, he felt as if someone had reached into his chest and was twisting and twisting, almost digging out his heart and lungs. Yu Qiyin had never craved power as much as he did now. If he could have supreme power, how could he allow Pang Xiao to be so presumptuous? He would not be humiliated in front of others. When Qin Yining was humiliated, he could not even stand up for her. When the Qin family returned to their rooms, Pang Xiao and Yuqi Yin could not continue to stay in the courtyard. Pang Xiao smiled provocatively at Yuqi Yin and said in a low voice, "What? Are you not satisfied?" Yuqi Yin gritted his teeth and did not bother to answer. Pang Xiao said, "Do you know that there is karma in this world? What you are suffering now, who knows if it is not the result of your father's evil deeds? When your father indulged your imperial mother to eat Qin Si's flesh, what did you do? After you took over power, what did you do to her? Now you are acting like an infatuated person. Don't you feel ashamed?" Yuqi Yin was a weak scholar. Before he was born, he had always been in contact with people who were kind and elegant. This was the first time someone had pointed at his nose and humiliated him. What the other party said was the truth. Seeing that Yuqi Yin did not speak, Pang Xiao smiled and said, "Oh right, there's another news. Seeing that you were once the Emperor of Dian, I will tell you this matter is related to the Dian." Yuqi Yin suddenly looked up at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao said in a low voice, "Your retired emperor took the money from the internal treasury and the national treasury, as well as the money from the rice and grain tax, and hid them all in one place. Do you know that?" Yuqi Yin heard this and suddenly opened his eyes wide. Pang Xiao said with a smile, "Don't worry. Your Majesty has ordered the troops to split into several groups. We must find the whereabouts of that batch of treasures. This king also thanks you on behalf of your Majesty for your selfless dedication. I believe that in the near future, we will definitely find that treasure. At that time, I will hold a banquet to thank you properly." Yuqi Yin thought about what his imperial father had done in the past. His whole body trembled as if he had fallen into an ice house. His imperial father had hidden such a large amount of silver, not to accumulate strength for the Dian dynasty, but for himself to be able to make a comeback one day. Why did he end up with such a father? The retired emperor refused to use that money for the people, refused to use it for the country, and insisted on keeping it for himself. Now that the Dezhou people had sent people to search everywhere, wouldn't the Dian dynasty's silver soon fall into Dezhou's treasury? Yuqi Yan's face turned from white to red, and from red to purple. There was a fishy taste in his throat, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Pang Xiao seemed to be too lazy to continue talking to Yuqi Yin. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked in the direction of the main house. Only then did he walk away with an air of arrogance, humming a festive tune. Yuqi Yin looked at Pang Xiao's back, and countless voices clamored at his mind. He resisted the discomfort and quickly returned to his courtyard with eunuch Lu's help. As soon as he entered the door, he vomited. There were traces of blood in his vomit, which frightened Li Yin and Gu Chong. They hurriedly ordered people to inform their superiors to call for a doctor. While the Yuqi Yin army was in chaos, Qin Yining followed Qin Huaiyuan to the rear courtyard for a walk. The surroundings were empty, and the father and daughter stood in the courtyard looking at the snowy scenery. If someone came close to eavesdrop, they would be discovered very quickly. Qin Huaiyuan opened his mouth and asked, "Prince Zhongshuan deliberately came here today to cause trouble?" Qin Yining nodded and said with a smile, "It wasn't just this time. Even when he took me back when we entered the city, and when I went to complain to the emperor, they were all set up on purpose." At this point, Qin Yining couldn't help but say with some apprehension, "Father, my relationship with Pang Zhishi isn't as bad as it seems on the surface. Are you angry with me?" Qin Huan stood with his hands behind his back, and his eyes drooped as he muttered, "Father won't be angry with you." Chapter 350. Actually, as early as when Qin Yining followed Xiaoyu to Dezhou and made up her mind to be with Pang Xiao, she had already guessed that her father would have many different attitudes. Perhaps he would advise her to distance herself from Pang Xiao, or perhaps he would tactfully remind her of the importance of her family. However, she had never thought that Qin Huaiyuan would behave like this. As the head of a large family, shouldn't he only care about the family and not care about his children's wishes? Shouldn't he only strive to maximize the benefits? For example, old Madam, who only cared about profits and built all of her decisions on the basis of the family's and her own interests. This was the norm. However, her father wasn't like this. Instead, he tried his best to put her happiness and wishes first. Qin Yining's heart was warm and her eyes were sore. She took a few deep breaths and suppressed her tears. Only then did she smile at Qin Huayuan and say, "I know that father will support me. Therefore, when facing Pang Zhishi, I've never been afraid. This is because I know that even if I make the wrong choice and fail, I still have a home to return to." Correct. You only need to remember this point. Qin Huayuan patted Qin Yining's shoulder with his large hand. Father has implicated you since you were young. You haven't enjoyed a single day of the life that a young lady from a large family should have. You've suffered a lot outside and survived with great difficulty. Now that you've returned home, you've been burdened by family matters. Everything you've experienced isn't what an ordinary young lady from a large family should experience. Since you haven't enjoyed the happiness of a young lady from a large family, how can father have the nerve to use the standards of a young lady from a large family to tie you down? That would be too unfair to you. As Qin Huayuan spoke, he slowly walked forward. Qin Yining also slowly followed. The snow creaked, leaving behind two sets of footprints, one big and one small. Qin Huayuan continued, "Fortunately, father still has some ability. I'm guessing that Zhou Di will use me to maintain the stability of the imperial court. I also have the ability to protect you. I know you're a smart child. You know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Father will not nag in front of you. But there is one thing you must learn to protect yourself. You have to protect her physically, emotionally, and even her life. Do you understand?" Qin Yining was visibly moved. He nodded heavily and said, "Father, I understand. I will control myself and won't hurt myself. And I also know that there are many important things in life, and relationships are not everything in life." Qin Huayuan stopped and looked at Qin Yining with a smile. "The fact that you can think this way is already different from many girls your age. Maybe it's because I've seen a lot in the marketplace since I was young." Qin Yining said with a smile, "In the face of hunger and poverty, people are most likely to reveal their inferiority. If they encounter a matter of life and death, they're even more likely to reveal their true nature. However, Liang City is located at the border, and there are often invasions and disturbances. We have seen such scenes many times, so it is not strange." Qin Huayuan sighed and exhaled a white mist in front of him. "That's right, father," Qin Yining said with a smile. "Previously, when old madam was on the way here, she threw away our family's belongings. The family has been really hard-pressed for money these days. I privately asked Pang Zhishi to help me find a good residence. After Master Zhong came, I asked him to buy the residence under someone else's name and renovate it. Now it can be lived in." "Oh," Qin Huayuan said with a smile. "Thank you for being so thoughtful. When I came back, I was still thinking about the problem of living there. I didn't expect you to have already settled it. Fortunately, I have some personal belongings. Later, father will go through the formalities with the nominal owner of the residence and have the property fall under your name. Then, our family can move in. It's not good to always live here." Qin Huayuan raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "It seems that the Zhaoyan agency made quite a bit of profit for you back then. This is all thanks to your landlord." Qin Yining respectfully acknowledged. After thinking about it, he decided to tell his father the truth. Actually, the Zhaoyan agency didn't make a lot of profit. It's just that when the capital was besieged, the people were in a hurry to escape, so they sold off many properties and shops. I thought that since I couldn't escape anyway, even if I kept the money from the Zhaoyan agency, it would probably be embezzled by the officials appointed by the Zhou. It would be better to give the money to the people to escape, who knew that the massacre of the city didn't happen, and I inadvertently made a fortune from the national disaster." Qin Huayuan raised his eyebrows and looked at Qin Yining. He said with a smile, "Who knows if good intentions won't be rewarded?" Qin Yining smiled bitterly and said, "The yield from the land I own now is about—" Before she could finish speaking, Qin Huayuan waved his hand and interrupted her. "Sister Yi, you chose to be with Pang Zhishi, but this path won't be easy. You don't have to tell me how much money you have or how many businesses and connections you have behind you. Just treat it as your own. In the future, the two of you might encounter a lot of trouble. If you have money and connections, father can rest assured. Qin Yining blinked, and her eyes were gradually covered with a layer of mist. She sniffed and nodded, okay. Qin Huayuan smiled and tapped the tip of her nose. He changed the topic and said, I just saw a little girl. She's a stranger. I heard that she's your savior. Qin Yining's heart skipped a beat. Her father was so good to her. It didn't seem right to hide Lian Xiaozhou from him. However, Lian Xiaozhou was the princess of Beiji. Her identity was too special. The fewer people who knew about it, the safer Lian Xiaozhou would be. If her father didn't know, it might not be a bad thing. With this in mind, Qin Yining repeated what she said to Qin Huayuan. Qin Huayuan didn't suspect anything. He sighed and said, I didn't expect this child's experience to be so similar to yours. It's fate that you two were able to meet. Since she doesn't have parents to rely on, you should take good care of her. This isn't just to repay her savior. Do you understand? Yes, father. I understand. Qin Yining smiled brightly. Qin Huayuan also smiled back. The father and daughter walked in a circle and chatted as they walked in circles. They left footprints on the snow on the ground. After they finished talking about what happened after they parted, they discussed moving house for a while before returning to their room. The next day, an eunuch from the palace came to pass on an imperial edict, summoning Qin Huayuan to the palace for an audience. Qin Huayuan had just returned to the capital. The next day, Your Majesty attached great importance to him. This news quickly spread throughout the imperial court. After the imperial court meeting, the Minister of Rights, Lian Shengjie, was reprimanded by Your Majesty in public due to his personal integrity problems exposed during the investigation. He was demoted by 3 ranks, from a standard 2nd-rank minister to a standard 5th-rank counselor. As for Qin Huayuan, Your Majesty personally appointed him as the new Minister of Rights, a standard 2nd-rank official. When this news spread, the Dayan officials who surrendered were both happy and jealous. This was because in the Dazhou dynasty, other than people like Pang Xiao, who had been personally promoted by Your Majesty because of their outstanding contributions, civil officials who wanted to enter the cabinet had to first be chosen as a scholar of the common law. Afterwards, they had to endure in the imperial court for 10 to 20 years like boiling oil. Only when they became a standard 2nd-rank minister of the 6 ministries would they have the opportunity to enter the cabinet. Qin Huayuan being appointed as the Minister of Rights was tantamount to telling everyone that he would be the next to enter the cabinet. The old madam sat in the parlor of the main room in the new rear residence, drinking tea. She heard a message from the little maidservant that she had just bought. She smiled so much that her eyes narrowed into slits. You my Menguer, after all, she then said to second master. You should also discuss with your older brother what kind of official to choose. Qin Yining frowned when she heard this. This matter wasn't up to her father to decide. Chapter 351. Old Madam took the invitation and didn't immediately open it. Instead, she carefully read the invitation and used the hand with the jade ring to gently stroke it. The smile on her lips was relieved and satisfied. In the end, it was her most beloved brother Meng who had the ability. Since the return of the legitimate eldest son, good things happened in the family one after another. First, they moved. Her son was regarded highly by Your Majesty. Now, even the nobles of the Zhou began to send invitations to their family. Didn't this mean that the family Qin status had once again risen to the ranks of the upper class, and they didn't have to look at other people's faces anymore? What old Madam was most afraid of was that the family Qin would be ruined in his generation. If that really happened, she wouldn't have the face to see the ancestors of the family Qin, even if she closed her eyes. Now it was all good. Her hanging heart was also relieved. When everyone saw old Madam gently stroking the invitation and treating it more gently than her grandchildren, they couldn't help but have their own thoughts. Qin Yining shook his head in amusement and didn't say much. Thinking about it, being able to live such a life again, old Madam could finally put down the big stone in her heart. After old Madam finished admiring the invitation, she opened it to read the contents. Then, she smiled and sighed with emotion. This Marchioness of Zhongyong is actually a very amiable person. Amiable? Qin Yining recalled Madame Lu's dainty face and arrogant attitude. He really couldn't associate the word amiable with her. This woman wasn't someone easy to deal with. If she was going to attend the banquet, she needed to do her homework in advance, just in case. Old Madam is right. We are all newcomers. Thinking about it, those who take the initiative to make friends with us should be easy to get along with. Qin Yining smiled and joined in the fun. Second Foreign also said, "Fortunately, eldest uncle came back. Otherwise, we would still be living in the guest house. How could such a good thing happen?" Old Madam liked Qin Huayuan. Naturally, she liked to hear people praise him. Second Foreign is right. This time, it's all thanks to Brother Ming. Second Old Master and Third Old Master looked at each other and quietly lowered their heads to drink their tea. In any case, the two of them had already accepted their fate. Their mother's heart was completely biased. Fortunately, their eldest brother was very good to them, and he was indeed very outstanding. Although the two brothers were sometimes jealous, they didn't have any enmity towards Qin Huayuan. However, Han, second young mistress, said, "It's just that this Marquis of Zhongyong did not do things properly and only sent an invitation to Sister Yi. What about the other girls in our family?" When Qin Yining heard this, he only looked at Han's second young mistress and did not refute. When she had first returned to the residence, Qin Yining had helped her a lot. After a long time, Qin Yining discovered that Qin Han was an extremely open-minded and straightforward person. Therefore, she was very close to this cousin of hers. Although Han's second young mistress was sometimes a little narrow-minded, she wasn't a bad person. However, today's words without meaning it, in the end, still made people feel uncomfortable. As expected, the smile on Qin Huaining's face became somewhat stiff. He smiled bitterly and said, "Second sister-in-law is joking. I'm an adopted daughter, and eighth sister is a concubine's daughter. Of course, the two of us can't be compared to fourth Mississippi." When second Old Madam heard this, she frowned and glared at Han, second young mistress. Mammy Qin, who was standing behind Old Madam, also secretly shook her head. Eighth Miss cast a sidelong glance at Qin Huaining and smiled innocently. This has nothing to do with being a concubine's daughter. She invited people to the banquet for no reason. Presumably, it was also for eldest uncle. Eldest uncle only has fourth sister as his only legitimate daughter. Isn't it natural for Lu Foreign to only send an invitation to fourth sister? Qin Huaining almost couldn't maintain the smile on her face after hearing eighth Miss's words. She really didn't understand what eighth Miss was thinking. Nowadays, other than Qin Yining, only eighth Miss was a family Qin descendant. Could it be that she didn't want to compete with Qin Yining? It was only because she was an adopted daughter that she couldn't do anything about it. Otherwise, she would have already thought a way to wipe away her previous shame. Second Master coughed in a low voice and said, "Miss 8 is right. Although you don't need to sew and mend to supplement the family's expenses these days, you girls should stay at home and learn how to embroider. If there's nothing important, don't meddle in the affairs of the outside world. This is only in front of your own family. If you go out in front of outsiders, aren't you afraid of being laughed at for being so petty?" Old Master didn't like Qin Huaining's behavior, so his tone was naturally strict. Qin Huaining was reprimanded until her face turned red and her face burned. She lowered her head and didn't dare to speak, but tears of grievance welled up in her eyes. Qin Yining helplessly shook her head. If she was Qin Huaining, she would obediently prepare for marriage right now. She believed that the family Qin wouldn't choose a bad husband for her for the sake of her face. She would live her life peacefully for the rest of her life. How good would that be? But she couldn't see through it and wasn't willing to give up. Since she had already decided to attend the banquet, she didn't wait for Qin Yining to make a move. Old Madam had already urged her to change her clothes and dress up. Qin Yining called Xian Yun to her side and asked in a low voice, "What is the background of this, Madam Lu? The last time I saw her in the palace, I saw that she was even more dignified than Anyang eldest princess. Even Anyang eldest princess had to call her older sister." Xian Yun had stayed in the capital for a long time and was very familiar with the people in the capital. Hearing this, she said in a low voice, "Miss, you don't know. This Madame Liu is a legitimate daughter of the Liu family side branch. The Liu family is a large aristocratic family that has been around for more than 100 years. It was already deeply rooted in the country of Beiji. Their family's businesses are all over the country and are involved in all walks of life. Their connections and power can't be underestimated. When Your Majesty started the war, if it wasn't for the financial support of the Liu family, he probably wouldn't have been able to conquer the capital. Your Majesty also thinks highly of the Liu family. The people of the Liu family outside the capital all have high statuses. Back then, Madame Liu was betrothed to General Mi. Oh, perhaps you don't know, but General Mi, Wang Yi, and Marquis Dingbei are brothers who fought together. They have been through life and death together. However, General Mi was born into a peasant family and had ordinary looks. He was also older than Madame Liu by more than 10 years. Madame Liu never liked General Mi. Even if General Mi doted on her a lot, she was never satisfied. Relying on the fact that she was a member of the Liu family, General Mi wouldn't do anything to her, so she started to openly raise gigolos. Gigolos? Qin Yining stopped what she was doing and turned around to look at Ji Yun in shock. Ji Yun said, "Miss, don't doubt it. This is all true. General Mi has always been a cuckold. After he died in battle, he was posthumously conferred the title of Marquis Zhongyong. Madame Liu then became the Marquis' wife and did things even more unscrupulously. Many people outside said that General Mi died in battle because he was angered by Madame Liu. He was a dignified man, yet he was suppressed by such a wife. The Yu family's power is too great. In addition, Your Majesty thinks highly of the Liu family. If General Mi wanted to escape, he could only die." Qin Yining was dumbfounded. After a long time, she nodded and sighed. She's really a powerful woman. This kind of person had no bottom line. She had to be careful. After dressing up properly, Qin Yining brought Ji Yun and Xian Yun to the Marquis Zhongyong's residence in a carriage. Chapter 352. The maidservant who came to greet them had a delicate and pretty appearance. She wore a light pink vest inlaid with white wind feathers and an emerald green cotton jacket. She was dressed in a clean and delicate manner. Qin Yining guessed that she was Madame Liu's capable maidservant. "Thank you for your trouble." Qin Yining smiled and nodded. With the support of Ji Yun and Xian Yun, she stepped on the wooden stool and got off the carriage. Qin Yining wore a snow-white fox fur coat with a sky-blue robe and a crescent-white 8-piece skirt. Her outfit was simple and elegant like an orchid, but her appearance was bright and beautiful. Even the light clothes couldn't suppress her sharp beauty. When a maidservant saw her clearly, she was stunned for a moment. She hurriedly smiled and curtsied. No wonder Madame Liu always praises Miss Qin's appearance. "Now, isn't your opinion just like the bright moon?" Qin Yining adjusted her skirt and smiled slightly. "Your Majesty is like the sun, and the Empress is like the bright moon. The sun and the moon shine together. I'm just the light of candle. How could I dare to accept such praise?" When the maidservant heard this, she broke out in a cold sweat. This Miss Qin was indeed worthy of being the daughter of the famous minister of a generation, Qin Huaiyuan. She was too sharp and cautious. Originally, the maidservant didn't have any other intentions. She just couldn't help but want to flatter and praise her. However, after hearing Qin Yining's words, she made a slip of the tongue. The maidservant didn't dare to delay and smiled as she led Qin Yining into the manor. After entering the Marquis Zhongyong's estate, Qin Yining discovered that there were no old people walking around the estate. Moreover, all the servant girls she saw were young and beautiful, and all the manservants had decent appearances. Qin Yining thought of the rumors about Madame Liu's appearance and vaguely understood. They walked through the mountains and corridors until they arrived at the main hall. Two young manservants dressed in green were guarding the door. Qin Yining frowned slightly. What kind of banquet was this? If he had only invited a woman, why would there be a servant to serve her? Qin Yining calmly entered through the door, took off the fox fur coat, and handed it to Xian Yun. With his eyes, he signaled Xian Yun to wait outside, while he led Ji Yun through the main entrance with a maidservant who led the way. After bypassing the glass screen, they came to a spacious and warm hall. The interior of the hall was covered with a red Persian carpet. Lily incense was burning in an incense burner on the floor, and a faint sweet smell lingered in the air. At the head of the table, Madame Lu and elder Princess Anyang were already seated. There were 2 tables on each side, and 3 young women had already taken their seats. The empty seat on the left was obviously prepared for Qin Yining. Qin Yining calmed himself down and went forward to greet eldest Princess Anyang with a smile. "Greetings, eldest princess." Li Helan was used to these women's jewelry. She narrowed her eyes when she saw Qin Yining, who was wearing a fresh outfit and had beautiful skin. But his absent-mindedness only lasted for a moment, and then he smiled amiably and said, "Qin Mimi is here. No need to be so polite. Today, Sister Lu is the host." Qin Yining bowed to Madame Lu again. "This little sister is new here, but Madame Lu doesn't mind. I am really grateful for your invitation today." Madame Lu faintly made an in sound. She pointed to the empty seat on the left and said, "Sit down. The people who came today are not outsiders. Qin Mimi is new to the capital, so you must not be familiar with the capital's matters. Let's just gather as sisters and get to know each other." "Yes, many thanks, Madame Lu." Qin Yining sat down on the empty seat. Madame Lu smiled and introduced the other 3 to her. She had a plump figure and was about 30 years old. She was Madame Lu's older sister. Her husband was doing business outside. Because her husband's surname was Chui, everyone called her Chui Lusher. The delicate and pretty woman with a worried expression was Madame Kai, but she had been a widow for many years. The younger one was Madame Lu's younger sister born of a concubine. Because she didn't introduce her, Qin Yining called her Little Lusher in her heart. Apart from her, there were also Madame Lu's older sister, Madame Lu's younger sister born of a concubine, the eldest princess of Anyang, and Madame Kai. Qin Yining could tell that today's banquet was probably a show of goodwill from Madame Lu's side branch of the Lu family Qin in the capital. Even if she didn't know whether the Lu family and the family Qin would stand on opposite sides in the future, this gesture was necessary. The Lu family must have made arrangements for her father. As she was thinking, Madame Lu smiled and said, "I invited Qin Mimi here today for 2 reasons. First, to get to know us sisters. Second, I saw that Qin Mimi has been through a lot, and your appearance is outstanding. I deeply feel that you and I are kindred spirits, so I want to befriend you." Her tone was very different from the previous time, when she was at daggers drawn and hostile. "That's right." Chui Lusher nodded with a smile and said, "I originally thought that women with the same appearance and character as my Mimi and the eldest princess of Anyang are rare. Today, after seeing Qin Mimi today, I finally understand why Prince Zhongshuan was so infatuated with you. Not to mention, men, even I feel my bones go soft when I see you." Qin Yining felt that these words were a bit outrageous, but because she didn't know these people, she didn't say much and just smiled. Madame Lu raised her eyebrows and smiled, then raised her jade hands and clapped 3 times. In the next moment, melodious music sounded. Qin Yining looked in the direction of the sound, only to find that there were already musicians waiting behind the red pillars and hanging bead curtains. In the midst of the melodious music, several dancers dressed in light muslin leisurely walked over and danced gracefully, each of their steps light as if they were stepping on lotus flowers. Then, several men slowly walked into the room. These men were dressed differently, their figures and appearances were different, and their temperaments were also different, but each of them was a handsome man with an outstanding temperament. Some were tall and elegant, while others were tall and imposing. There were even 2 handsome young men who looked exactly the same, one in red and the other in white, as refined as the red and white plum blossoms. Qin Yining didn't understand why so many men had come, but in his heart, he was even more displeased with this banquet. It seemed that this Madame Lu really didn't pay attention to etiquette. How could a woman's banquet allow men to enter? When Madame Lu saw these people, she immediately smiled and pointed to a young man with a tall and imposing figure who was wearing a silver white sleeved shirt and said, "Why aren't you pouring wine for the eldest princess?" Then she pointed to a 17 or 18-year-old scholar in white and said, "Fill Miss Chen's cup as well." That elegant white-clothed scholar faintly smiled and then came to Chen Ening's side. His white and slender fingers picked up the jade pot and filled Chen Ening's green jade cup. Then he secretly sat down in the empty seat beside Chen Ening. Chen Ening didn't have any expression on his face. He watched as the handsome man who looked like a Pang Shao sat down beside eldest Princess Anyang. His left hand held the pot and poured wine, while his right hand intimately rested on the back of eldest Princess Anyang's chair behind her. This kind of offense made eldest Princess Anyang's face flush red. She shyly looked at the man's side profile and then lowered her head. Chen Ening finally understood why these people had come. It was like when men were discussing business, they wanted to drink wine with women. It seemed that Madame Lu had invited her to this banquet to drink wine with women. She was an unmarried girl. What did Madame Lu mean by this? Thinking of Madame Lu's opening words, Chen Ening's face turned red, and even her neck turned red. These people must have thought that since she had already been stolen by Pang Shao, she should already know what was going on. Moreover, since Pang Shao had kidnapped her, she might not like that kind of imposing man. Therefore, they had arranged for a gentle and elegant man to serve her. It wasn't a secret that eldest Princess Anyang liked Pang Shao, so Madame Lu had arranged for a man with a similar temperament to Pang Shao to serve her. Should she praise Madame Lu for being so meticulous? Young Miss Chen. The elegant man beside her saw that Chen Ening wasn't drinking and immediately picked up the cup. He had a gentle smile as he looked at her. His light brown eyes were filled with a warmth that could melt the winter snow. Young Miss Chen, please eat a cup. This is a fruit wine specially prepared for you. It isn't very strong, but it is sweet and refreshing. Chen Ening pursed her lips and pushed aside the wine cup that the man was about to bring to her lips. She said in a cold voice, "No need. There was no good wine and no good banquet. Madame Lu dared to arrange for these men to drink wine. So how could she dare to use the things here?" The man stared at Chen Ening's pretty face with infatuation. He had been mesmerized for a long time. He didn't expect her to reject him, so he was caught off guard and spilled a glass of wine on his sleeve and half of his clothes. The commotion here immediately alarmed the person at the head. Madame Lu's red lips were slightly opened as she took a piece of orange from the red-clothed twin. She was leaning against the white-clothed youth's chest and angrily looked over when she heard the commotion. Chen Ening stood up and bowed to Madame Lu and Li Helan as she said, "Many thanks for Madame Lu and eldest Princess Anyang's good intentions, but this little girl still has matters to attend to at home. It isn't convenient for me to stay here, so I'll be leaving first." After saying this, she turned around and called out to the red-faced Ji Yun before turning to leave. Madame Lu suddenly sat up and fiercely slammed the table. "Chen clan, you dare to give me face. If you dare to step out of this door, then don't blame me for being ruthless." Chen Ening gave a cold laugh. She turned around and sternly looked at Madame Lu and Li Helan. "Do you think I grew up being scared? Moreover, you and I just met, so what kind of feelings do we have? I want to ask eldest Princess Anyang, does Marquis Dingbei know that you're coming to the banquet?" "You." Li Helan was furious when he heard this, but his heart was filled with panic. He felt a bit guilty, and his mouth didn't think before speaking. "What are you so noble about? You're just a withered flower that Big Brother Shao played with. Today, I gave you a chance to taste what gentleness feels like, but you don't appreciate it." Chen Ening's face was like ice as he coldly said, "Then eldest Princess Anyang wants to taste the taste of power. So you found this kind of person? You're shameless." Li Helan's heart was poked where it hurt. He was both embarrassed and angry, his eyelashes already filled with tears. The man who had a similar build to Pang Shao quickly hugged Li Helan and softly comforted her. Chapter 353. Chen Ening was too lazy to look at this chaotic scene. She turned around and left. Xian Yun quickly came forward to help Chen Ening put on a cloak. Ji Yun supported her on the other side as they quickly walked out. Li Helan was so angry that her entire body was trembling. She angrily shouted, "Come, take her away for this princess." Yes. The servants that came with the princess's manor immediately obeyed and surrounded Qin Yining, Ji Yun, and Xian Yun. They were only waiting for Li Helan's order to move. If it was a normal girl, seeing so many guards and servants surrounding her with unkind expressions while she was in someone else's territory, she would have already become afraid. But Qin Yining was used to big scenes. She had encountered many assassination attempts, so she naturally wasn't as timid as a normal girl. She calmly turned around and looked at Li Helan with a smile that wasn't a smile. Her voice was gentle, as if she was discussing what to eat for dinner, but the sharpness in her words was very clear. "Eldest Princess of Anyang, today I was invited to the banquet hosted by Madame Lu. The invitation was seen by everyone in my family. Isn't it inappropriate for you to act like this at the host's banquet? Also, if I lose a single strand of hair here, the family Qin won't let this matter go. Or is it that you're following an imperial edict today?" The word imperial edict hit Li Helan's greatest fear. Li Helan knew that her happiness was dependent on Li Qitian's grace, so she would never go against Li Qitian's wishes. Just like her marriage, she had to obey Li Qitian's wishes in exchange for stability and happiness. The Empress Dowager had told Li Helan in private that Li Qitian attached great importance to the family Qin. This was because Li Qitian needed to rope in the dying faction that surrendered. If they really quarreled and Li Qitian misunderstood her, she would have no happiness to speak of in the future. Li Helan was scared and angry, but he didn't dare to ask the servants to take the Qin Yining directly. He just glared at her angrily. Qin Yining hunted all year round and never retreated, even in the face of a hungry wolf. She was even less afraid of a spoiled princess. "Eldest Princess of Anyang, you should think about your own matters. Even if you don't think that you're breaking the rules by doing this behind Prince Consort Ji's back, you should at least think about the face of the imperial family." This was scolding Li Helan for not abiding by the virtues of a wife, for having an affair behind her husband's back. Li Helan's face burned as if it was on fire. She pointed at Qin Yining with her trembling fingernails painted bright red and said sharply, "Who do you think you are? How dare you teach me a lesson? The road is uneven and there will be people stepping on it. I'm just feeling wrong for Prince Consort Ji. Besides, if you're not guilty, why would you be so angry?" Li Helan was filled with rage. When she was about to speak, she was stopped by Mrs. Lu, who had been silently watching the play from the side. Madame Lu stood up and casually pushed aside the two handsome young men who were trying to help her up. She slowly walked down the steps with her hips swaying. She stroked the loose golden hairpin in her hair and asked mockingly, "Miss Qin, are you planning to make an enemy out of the entire Lu family?" Qin Yining said in a surprised voice, "Does Mrs. Lu have the ability to represent the entire Lu family?" These words stabbed at Mrs. Lu's sore spot, making her face turn red. After a while, she said in a sharp voice, "Not to mention you. Even your father or Prince Zhongshuan would have to be respectful when they see my Lu family. Who do you think you are, daring to act wildly in my territory? You are just a withered flower that has been played with. What do you get the face to act all high and mighty in front of me? Inviting you here is giving you face. Don't be so shameless." Qin Yining was almost amused by Mrs. Lu. She was too lazy to argue with people who didn't know what they were talking about. She just said, "Oh, so Mrs. Lu can represent the entire Lu family? Does your family know that you have such great ability? You got guts. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Do you believe that I won't make them feed you today?" She pointed at the handsome youths, her intention obvious. If Qin Yining refused to give in, Mrs. Lu planned to make Qin Yining accept her hospitality. Qin Yining narrowed his eyes, and a cold light shot out from his eyes. It was as piercing as an ice arrow. "I'll lend you some courage. You can try." She wasn't even afraid. Was she even a woman? "You." Mrs. Lu was so angry that her lips trembled, and she didn't say anything for a long time. She really didn't dare to do anything to Qin Yining. If something really happened, wouldn't she be going against the Lu family's wishes? The reason why she invited Qin Yining here today was because she heard that her family's ancestor wanted to be on good terms with Qin Huaiyuan. Even if they couldn't become part of the same faction in the future, they could avoid becoming enemies in the future. It was just that he didn't expect that this woman, who usually looked gentle and quiet, would be so terrifying when she became powerful. Qin Yining felt very bored. She turned around and pushed aside an old maid in front of her. Then she brought Xian Yun and Ji Yan out. The old maid looked at the silent Mrs. Liu and eldest Princess Anyang. She tactfully brought the servants and guards to the side. Even if they were people from the princess palace, they would still be punished if they made a mistake. Li Helan and Mrs. Liu watched as Qin Yining walked past the people blocking her way and walked out quickly. Their faces were as dark as water. However, at this time, a maid's voice suddenly came from outside. Prince Consort Ji and Prince Zhongshuan are here. Hearing this, Li Helan was so shocked that she almost fell over. She quickly waved her hand at the man who looked like Pang Xiao behind her. When the male companions heard that Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao were here, they were so scared that their faces turned pale. They quickly got up to leave. These two were two killing gods, one from the south and one from the north. Who could afford to offend them? The tall man who looked like Pang Xiao was so scared that his face turned white. Ji Ziyu's might had already shaken the north. He could lead the Dragon Legion to suppress the Taitan soldiers until they couldn't raise their heads. He had actually lost his mind and wanted to enjoy the benefits of being with such a hero. He had simply lost his mind and was tired of living. Qin Yining also heard the servant's message. When he walked out the door, he saw two people, one in black and one in white, walking side by side. Both of them were equally tall. One of them was wearing a black sable fur cloak, while the other was wearing a white fox fur cloak. Their auras were so cold that it was as if they were possessed by a killing god. Pang Zhao's phoenix eyes narrowed. Although there was still a mocking smile on his face, his eyes were like stars in the cold night, making people feel cold and distant. Ji Ziyu's jade-like handsome face was half hidden in the snow-white fox fur collar. His face was expressionless as he calmly looked into the room. His entire person was as exquisite as a jade carving meticulously carved by a skilled craftsman. This was the first time that Qin Yining had observed Ji Ziyu so closely. He was secretly amazed that there was such a beauty in the world that transcended gender. Pang Xiao had already arrived in front of Qin Yining. He coldly mocked, "You're here too? Is this a place that you can come to?" Qin Yining glanced at the people in the room from the corner of his eyes. He knew that she had to be tough and not contradict her performance just now. Qin Yining raised his eyebrows and said, "Prince Zhongshan really knows how to joke. Where I am, do I have to report to Wang Yi all the time?" Pang Zhao's face darkened. It was as if he couldn't accept that one of his former playthings had suddenly become so disobedient. On the other hand, Ji Ziyu had already arrived in front of Li Helan. Li Helan's face was pale, but her ears and neck were red. When she saw Ji Ziyu, it was the first time that she was so careful and gentle. "Why is the prince consort here?" Ji Ziyu cupped his hands in greeting to Li Helan. He didn't look at the other women in the room, nor did he pay attention to Cui Lushi and little Lushi's gazes. He walked straight to the men from before and looked at them with his hands behind his back. He said, "Princess, did you have fun?" No, I didn't." "You don't have to explain to me. You are the princess, and I am the prince consort. You're my master. You can do whatever you want." Ji Ziyu turned around coldly and looked quietly at Li Helan. Li Helan only felt her heart beating wildly. When she thought back to their wedding night and looked at the person in front of her, she couldn't help but feel her heart beat faster. Such a handsome man was her rightful husband, but he didn't give her any face. It wasn't easy for her to muster up the courage to have fun outside, but she was still discovered by him. Wouldn't their days in the future be more and more difficult? For the corner of her eye, Li Helan saw Pang Xiao glaring angrily at Qin Yining. She felt a wave of bitterness in her heart. These two men, one was her husband, and the other was the person she had secretly loved for so many years. She really didn't want to give up on either of them. Qin Yining winked at Pang Xiao. Then, she led her two maidservants and walked past the people who were trying to stop them. Ji Ziyu was pacing back and forth in front of the group of gigolos. The people who wanted to escape but didn't have the time to do so. In front of the handsome and cold Jiziyu, they all shrunk back and trembled like quails. Jiziyu was still expressionless. Which one does the eldest princess like? You might as well ask Madame Lu and bring them back to play. No, no, no. Prince Consort, listen to me. I didn't. The eldest princess is a noble. Why do you need to explain yourself to a subject like me? Jiziyu stopped in front of the tall and sturdy man. He turned around and smiled at Li Helan. You like this kind of man? Li Helan's face seemed like it was on fire as she shook her head. Pang Xiao walked towards Madame Lu and asked, May I ask Madame Lu, are these people your gigolos? Madame Lu's face was like a spring peach. She shyly looked at Pang Xiao and gently nodded her head. Pang Xiao saw her like this and smiled, saying, If Madame Lu's gigolos offend this king, can this king deal with them? Madame Lu was already dazzled by that smile. She didn't have any room to think and could only nod her head. Pang Xiao walked in front of them and asked in a low voice, Who was the one serving the eldest princess? The man serving Li Helan was pale and didn't dare answer. The people beside him all looked at him and exposed him. Pang Xiao walked in front of him and asked, It was you. The man knelt down with a thump. This lowly one is following orders. This lowly one doesn't dare. This lowly one doesn't dare. He kowtowed as he spoke. Pang Xiao turned around and asked Li Helan, Which hand did he use to touch you? Li Helan's lips trembled. He was so embarrassed that he couldn't find a hole to hide in. Pang Xiao sneered and pulled out the sword at Jiziyu's waist. He tapped the man's shoulder twice and said angrily, You dare touch my brother's woman? You're seeking death. Chapter 354. Pang Xiao's sword was dripping with blood. His phoenix eyes were cold and sharp, but his slanted eyebrows were slightly raised, as if he was enjoying the smell of blood. He crouched down and said, How is it? Does it feel good? The man lying on the ground was in so much pain that his entire body was trembling. He really wanted to faint, but the intense pain pulled at his consciousness, making him more awake than ever. Wang Yi, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Wang Yi, please spare me. The man's begging voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. But in the hall that was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard, his voice was like a heavy hammer, fiercely pounding on everyone's heart. Madame Lu was already so scared that her face turned pale. After a while, she recovered and said with a frown, Prince Zhongshuan, how can you be so cruel? Cruel? What kind of person is this? This king even thinks that he dirted Alan's sword. Pang Xiao wiped the blood off the sword on the man's body, then casually threw it to Jiziyu. If it was anyone else, they would have been stunned by Pang Xiao's sudden move. But Jiziyu still stood in place with a frosty expression. With a clang, the sword accurately returned to the scabbard at Jiziyu's waist. Pang Xiao's cool and unrestrained throwing of the sword, Jiziyu's complete trust, and the murderous aura exuding from the two at the same time, made everyone present feel terrified. Li Helan looked at the two handsome men, and his ears became even hotter. Madame Lu pursed her lips and smiled. She was moved and said, Forget it. Since Wang Yi can only be appeased like this, it doesn't matter if Wang Yi takes all of them. When the male companions heard this, they all looked at Madame Lu in disbelief. They never would have thought that Madame Lu would take the initiative to give them away. Looking at the half-unconscious man on the ground with his arms crippled, they all trembled and knelt down to kowtow. Pang Xiao gave a cold smile. Aren't these Madame Lu's precious treasures? Aren't you afraid that people will be hurt if you say this? Madame Lu wanted to say, To make you smile, taking their lives is nothing. But when she looked up, she saw Pang Xiao's cold eyes. Even if he was smiling, his body was filled with murderous aura, as if he was a beast that could pounce at any time. Madame Lu's words, she didn't dare to say them even if she was beaten to death. Come. Li Helan quickly chased after the two of them in a panic. This one doesn't have anything to play with. Husband, send this one back to the princess palace. Jiziyu turned around to look at Li Helan and said, This one is stupid and can't serve the eldest princess well. I'll have to trouble the eldest princess people to serve you well." He politely nodded and continued walking. Li Helan was truly panicking this time. Even if Jiziyu was cold to her before, he wasn't as polite and distant as he was right now. She found that Jiziyu being cold to her wasn't the most terrifying thing because Jiziyu's personality was cold to begin with. The most terrifying thing was that Jiziyu was suddenly polite to her. They didn't know each other too late. When they met before, Jiziyu had never been this polite to her. Li Helan found that after the wedding, although one of them lived in the princess palace and the other lived in the prince's palace, and they had only done things as husband and wife on the wedding night, Jiziyu had always been cold to her and a bit casual. Li Helan really regretted it in the past. She shouldn't have been greedy and try to play around. Jiziyu was already like this, so how could they live as husband and wife in the future? Li Helan chased after a few steps. Seeing the black and white figures quickly walk away without any hesitation, she finally couldn't help crying. Pang Xiao and Jiziyu walked side by side. They were silent the entire way out of the Zhongyong Marquis Palace. Pang Xiao felt that it was unfair for Jiziyu in his heart. But he also knew that from the moment Jiziyu agreed to become the prince consort of the imperial family, he had already made all kinds of mental preparations. Although there was no lack of gentle, kind, noble, and elegant princesses, there were also many like Madame Lu who kept a gigolo. Princess Shang and husband and wife didn't stand on equal footing to begin with. The princess was the master, and the prince consort was specially used to serve the princess. When the princess needed, the prince consort would be invited to the princess palace. Only then would the prince consort be able to get close to his wife. Usually, if the princess didn't call for him, the prince consort wouldn't be able to touch the princess at all. He wouldn't even be able to take in a servant girl who slept with him. This was the helplessness of serving the imperial family. Pang Xiao felt that with Jiziyu's talent and character, it was really unfair for him to be the prince consort. However, he also understood that Jiziyu's current situation was also one where his meritorious service shocked the emperor. Jiziyu's situation was as difficult as his. Jiziyu had agreed to be Li Helan's prince consort after many considerations. The two of them walked out of the palace in silence. They saw their mounts kicking their hooves in the snow, creating a patch of mud on the ground. On the side of the carriage, Qin Yining lifted the curtain and looked over. Pang Xiao was delighted to see Qin Yining, but he couldn't show it on his face. He coldly scolded, "What are you still doing here? Don't tell me you still want to continue enjoying yourself with Madame Lu?" Qin Yining looked at Jiziyu, then lowered his eyes and lowered the curtain. He didn't reply and ordered the carriage to set off. As the sound of the horse's hooves gradually faded away, Jiziyu said helplessly, "Don't you like the Qin clan? Why are you so blunt? How are you going to make up for hurting her heart in the future?" Pang Xiao said, "She's the daughter of my enemy. So what if I like her?" Jiziyu silently sighed as he heard this. He then patted Pang Xiao's shoulder and said, "Thank you for your help. There's no need for thanks between brothers. But Alan, you can talk to your majesty about this matter." "What's the use of talking to him? Your majesty doesn't have that much free time to deal with these mundane matters. Besides, I'm supposed to serve the princess. The princess has the freedom to do whatever she wants. She can also have gigolos, but I can only protect my body for her." Jiziyu was used to being a man of few words. He would only speak freely in front of his brothers, no longer stingy with his words. Pang Xiao said, "Forget it. Don't think too much. I'll treat you to wine. Come, let's go to my house." As he spoke, he took the reins and nimbly mounted his horse. Jiziyu also took his own horse. He looked up at Pang Xiao, who was sitting upright on the horse, and asked, "I heard that your dear mother has returned. Is it convenient to go to your house to drink wine? The palace is so big. Don't tell me there's no place for the two of us to drink wine. Don't be so long-winded. Let's go." Jiziyu didn't ask any more questions. He mounted his horse and followed Pang Xiao to the palace. The two of them drank wine in the outer courtyard study until the middle of the night. They were both drunk and sprawled out on the heated Kong in the study. As for Qin Yining, he only caught up with Qin Huaiyuan the next evening. He told Qin Huaiyuan everything that had happened yesterday. In the end, he asked worriedly, "Father, can we really not afford to offend the Liu family?" Qin Huaiyan nodded and said, "The Liu family was already a famous aristocratic family back in Beiji. Their economic power is unfathomable. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they are as rich as a country. Back then, the Liu family was loyal to your majesty and provided the rebel army with food and money. That's why the Zhou was able to destroy Beiji. It's clear how powerful their family is now. Although that Madame Liu is only from a side branch of the Liu family, even if she's from a side branch into Zhou's capital, as long as the surname is Liu, you have to be careful when interacting with them." When Qin Yining heard this, he frowned thoughtfully. After thinking for a while, he said worriedly, "Father, I'm afraid that my actions yesterday have already offended Madame Liu and eldest Princess Anyang. Do you think I've unintentionally offended the Liu family, harmed our family? I'm really afraid of bringing trouble to our family." Although she didn't regret her decision, she was still worried about her family Qin. After all, her family Qin had only just gained a foothold into Zhou. How could they become enemies with a large family like the Liu family? When Qin Huaiyuan saw his daughter's rare, listless appearance, he couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Silly girl, what are you thinking about? Have you forgotten what your father told you the day before? Don't be so overcautious and think so much. Just do what you think is right. If something happens, Father will help you. We didn't come to this world to suffer and be wronged. No matter how powerful the Liu family is, what can they do?" Qin Yining looked at Qin Huaiyuan's bright smile and couldn't help but laugh. "Father is right. It's me who's too rigid. No matter how strong the enemy is, we can't retreat. Moreover, I believe that with Father's talent, becoming a famous minister is only a matter of time." The father and daughter talked happily, just like when they were in Dian. Qin Huaiyuan didn't have son and only had Qin Yining as his only daughter. Naturally, he spoiled her to the bottom of his heart. Qin Yining was never a spoiled and arrogant person. She didn't match the steadiness and open-mindedness of her age. Also, no matter what Qin Huaiyuan talked about, she could always give her own opinions. The father and daughter really got along well with each other. This made Qin Huaiyuan want to treat his daughter better and make up for all the pain she suffered when she was young. After 2 days like this, there was suddenly a rumor outside. It was said that Madame Liu and the fourth miss of the family Qin family didn't have the same 8 characters and had long been at odds with each other. When Madame Liu heard that the family Qin family's courtyard was rented, she actually threatened to buy it. Even if it was empty, she wouldn't rent it to the family Qin family. She wanted to let the family Qin family know how powerful she was. In the capital, not just anyone could offend her. When Qin Yining heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. How interesting. This Madame Liu is very interesting. With her around, my days in the capital won't be so boring. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.